TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Welcome to another edition of the RF Video Shoot interview series. Today, joined by legendary wrestler Greg Gagne. Thanks for being here today with us.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Long time in the making. I've really wanted to sit down with you for many, many years, and I'm glad we had this opportunity.
I wanted to sit down with you, too.
Really?
Even though I never knew you?
Yeah.
I always wanted to sit down with you, and here we are sitting. So let's go.
Thanks
let's
for
rock and roll, baby.
All right. My very first question to you, obviously you were born into a wrestling family, but we have to ask, what are your early memories of being in the pro wrestling business or being around the business as a young child?
Being around it? Well, I'll tell you, my first memory, I was born in 1948, and my father started wrestling in 49. His first match was in Minneapolis, Minnesota against Abe King Kong Cashy. And he went about 18 minutes with him. He said, "Oh, this old guy, I'm gonna hammer him, and I'll get out of here quick." And he had his 3 football buddies: Bud Grant, who eventually coached the Minnesota Vikings, Billy Bye, who was a quarterback on the team, and Jim Molosky were there, and 3 pretty stout athletes. And my dad used to tell the story that he got in trouble and they jumped up and Cashy leaned over the rope and he said, "Sit down, punks," and they all sat back down. But then they told my father he was too small to wrestle in that area, so they sent us to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we lived in a trailer, my mom and dad and I, and we traveled around that Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana was the territory down there. His second week there, he won the light heavyweight championship, the NWA light heavyweight championship. But my fondest memory is that we used to stay in this trailer, and across from the trailer park, quite a ways away, was a big outdoor movie screen. And my dad would come home at night, and I'd sit on his shoulders, and we'd watch the movie. We couldn't hear anything, but we'd watch the movie.
Right.
So that was my first memory of, being on the road with my father. And then, of course, as we're driving down the road, he had these little songs and games we played all the time, and it was fun.
What was it like growing up with Vern as your father?
Well, it was, I mean, I tell the story. Growing up, my idols were Mickey Mantle and Bart Starr. And my dad came home one day and he said he was just in Washington, D.C., and that's when the old Washington Senators and the Yankees were playing them. And he was invited down to the bench, so he sat through the game. He said Casey Stengel went into the bench and slept the whole game, and he kind of hung with Mantle and Whitey Ford at the time. So he always knew they were my idol, and that when Washington moved to Minnesota, where were we?
You were talking about being on the bench with...
Oh, yeah. So the Washington Senators then moved to Minnesota, and the Yankees came to Minnesota to play. And my dad brought me down to the game and down to the locker room afterwards. And we walk in the locker room. Now, here's my idol, Mickey Mantle. Here comes Mantle, Ford, Moose Skowron, Tony Kubik, Bobby Richardson. They come running up and they swarm my dad, And that's when I realized that, here's my idol, Even though the Yankees and Mantle still was, they gave me a nice autographed baseball, but they just swarmed him. And he was like a superstar to them. But you have to realize back in 1950, we first got the call, we were in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that wrestling was going on the network TV, on the old DuPont network, which is now WGN. And they invited Vern up to be on TV. They wanted a young guy that had a great amateur background, great wrestling background. He was an NCAA champion, a Big Ten champion, wrestled on the 1948 Olympic team. So, he really had the credentials. And so they brought him to Chicago, and Fred Kohler was the promoter at the time. This is 1950. And he said, "Vern, at that time, Gorgeous George, and it was a lot of the gimmicks were in wrestling,
right?
Much what you see today." But so Fred Kohler said, "Vern, here's what we're going to do. We're going to lower you from the ceiling. You're going to dress up as a Martian, and you're going to be lowered into the ring. And that's how we're going to open up the show." He said, "Fred, here's the deal. Here's my background. Big Ten champion, NCAA champion, wrestled on the Olympic team. I've got a pair of tights and boots. You got 30 wrestlers here. I'm going down to the ring. Send them in one by one or 2 at a time or 3 at a time. If I can't beat them all, I'll quit right now. But otherwise, I'm going in the ring like this." And that's what he did. And he became the first real major star in professional wrestling. A lot of people don't know that, but World Guinness Book of Records, he was the first athlete besides Babe Ruth to make over $100,000.
He was the real deal, that's for sure.
Yeah,
so, I mean,
he really was. So, I mean, those are my fondest memories of him. And you know, I mean, growing up with him as your father, it made it a little tough, you know, at school.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
What was the best and worst thing about having a star pro wrestler as your father?
Because everybody wanted to try you.
Right.
No matter how old you were. I mean, I'm in second, third grade. You know, kids wanted, they watched them in Minneapolis at that time. Wrestling came on Tuesday nights, right? That's when they wrestled at the arena, and they'd show the first couple matches and never show the last couple. So you get to school and everybody wanted to know, you know, did he win or did he win? Who won? And in fact, I went to a Catholic school. And even though the kids, there was a few kids that wanted to try me out all the time. So I had to wrestle my father in the basement of our house, or our living room. And you know, he made me learn the ropes early. On how, well, yeah, he learned how, you know, taught me how to defend myself.
Yeah.
Taught me balance and leverage, and you know how you can really kind of take care of anybody, even no matter what kind of fighters they are.
Did your father protect the business from you when you were growing up?
He protected it from everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he did. He loved the sport and he believed it. And if you didn't believe it was real, then you shouldn't be in it.
At what age did you want to get into the business?
I was playing football at the University of Wyoming. I finished up my senior year. I actually started at Minnesota, transferred out there, played quarterback out there, and had a chance. I signed as a free agent with the Atlanta Falcons and Norm Van Brocklin, who was the coach then. So I finished school right after the season. I didn't finish my classes. I went home, and my dad said, "Here, you're going to get yourself in shape if you're going to go play football." I said, "Well, I'm in good football shape. I just have to throw the ball a lot." He said, "But I want you to learn some other techniques that are going to help you out. I want you to train with Billy Robinson." Billy had this real grueling workout that he did, and it was 2 hours a day, and the last hour was all on the mat. And we'd wrestle on the mat, and it taught me balance again and leverage, but at the end of it, he always did submission wrestling with me. And he'd teach you about 3 holds in, you know, a week. And get on the mat with him, and you know, he would be down there and he'd leave his arm open, and you'd think, "Oh God, yeah, here's what I have to do." And by the time you go to grab the arm, he would reverse it and put a submission hold on you and have you screaming your ass off. God, I used to get mad at him. But it hardened me up. I trained from about December till June with him. And then I was getting ready to go to the football camp and decided that I liked wrestling better. And I think this is the direction I want to take. Atlanta had signed Steve, a kid from, Pat Sullivan from Auburn, who'd won the Heisman Trophy that year. So I said, "God, I'm not going to get much of a look, and I'm really kind of liking this wrestling."
Right.
And he says, "Well, what makes you think you can wrestle?" He says, "You know, you're pretty small." And I said, "Well, I'm sure you were, you know, what were you when you started? 205, 210? I said, "You know, I'm not that. I'm 180, 185, but I'll put weight on." "Well, I don't know why you think you can wrestle." I said, "Well, I've learned a lot from Billy, and I think I can." So he was sponsoring Ken Patera to go into the Olympics that year. As Ken was the first guy to pass 500 pounds over his head. And he had sponsored him with Ken going to turn pro when he finished the Olympics. Ken kind of fell on his butt over there and didn't do well in the competition. So Ric Flair joined us. Ric was a good friend of mine in college. He always wanted to be a wrestler. I called Ric. I called my good friend Jim Brunzell. We were roommates at Minnesota and football players together. And then Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik, who wrestled on the Iranian Olympic team, he wanted to turn pro. And Khosrow was about the same size as me at that time. We were about 180 pounds. And then Bob Bruggers, who came out of football, pro football with the Denver Broncos and the San Diego Chargers, played with Wahoo McDaniels, and Wahoo recommended him. So we had 200 in our class the first day. And at the end of the day, there were 6 of us left.
Wow.
Most of them didn't make it through the first half hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a camp.
That's
talent right there.
Yeah.
Besides your father, what other wrestlers did you enjoy watching beyond your father growing up?
Growing up, I liked watching Mad Dog Vachon. Mad Dog was a personality that was really off the wall, scared the crap out of everybody. You know, I liked Wilbur Snyder, Gene Kaninsky, Cowboy Bill Watts, Red Bastien. I learned a lot from Red, stole some of his stuff. I liked watching Nick Bockwinkel. I mean, I liked watching, you know, kind of everybody. I was a fan.
Yep. Now, before you started working in the ring, I want to ask you some other questions. Your father and Billy Robinson starred in the movie, and I believe your father wrote and produced the movie The Wrestler. What are your memories of that movie being filmed? Did you ever go to the set or anything like that?
I was in it.
Okay.
I was a referee for the Vern Billy match at the end of the thing. Wasn't you know, I was on the road at the time, so you know, I was only, when I was called in to do the shoot, that the wrestling shoot, that's when I came in. I was around Ed Asner quite a few times. He was over at the house, and my dad and Ed became great friends. They were really good friends.
Is it true that your dad sold a piece of the film to other promoters and wrestlers, maybe to help finance it?
They all had a piece of it, yeah. All the promoters, Eddie Graham, Jim Barnett, Fritz von Erich. You know, from there, I don't remember, the Vince McMahon Sr. They all invested in it.
Was he disappointed that the film was not a bigger hit than it was?
Well, you know, it was a bigger hit than what people thought.
It was underground.
Yeah, well, no, it wasn't. It really did well in the theaters all around the country. The problem is the distribution, the people, they take all the money.
Right.
I mean, every place that we talked to, San Francisco, LA, there was lines of people getting in for weeks at a time. So, you know, the industry itself said it didn't do well, but after they get through their distribution charges and all that, and they were new to the business, so that's why they didn't know, and they were really taken advantage of.
What led to your father making that movie? What was his passion behind it?
Really to expose wrestling more to the public. You know, this is back in the 70s. You know, everybody had their regional promotions. Some were doing better than others. People always had the idea that wrestling was, you know, kind of a sideshow.
Yeah.
And his interpretation and his delivery of wrestling was totally different than a lot of promoters around the country. When you wrestled for Vern, you better know how to wrestle. You better be able to compete in the ring, and you better be exciting. You know, he wanted people to believe that wrestling was real. And that was, when you came to the AWA, you better be able to make people in that front row believe that this is a real match.
How long before you stepped inside the squared circle for your first match? How long did you train for?
Well, I trained 2 years, 2.5 years.
You ever want to quit during the training at all?
No.
Okay.
No, I loved it. I mean, Billy was a little frustrating working out with him because I didn't feel like I was learning as much as I could. But he taught me a lot, really, for my size and then what my father wanted. He said, when you go in the ring, there's going to be people that are going to take a lot of shots at you because of me. So you better know how to defend yourself. And really, I was never afraid to go in the ring with anybody except Mad Dog Vachon. He's the one that, you know, I'd see Vern come home with scratch bites and bites all over him and, you know, shit.
Right.
And the first time I wrestled him, I was in Minneapolis. And I said to my dad, I said, what do I do with him? He said, hit him twice as hard as he hits you. I said, that's it? He said, that's it. So I got in there, and I remember I went to lock up with him, and Mad Dog hit me. And, you know, he had those hands like cement and shit. When he hit you, it felt like that cartoon creature. You know, you felt like your body was just going to crack all the way down to your feet.
Right.
And I hit him back, and about the third time, I hit him right over the ear, and he lost his equilibrium. And I grabbed a leg, and I took him down, and I went to take a breath, and he peeled all the skin off my back. I went, oh, shit. And got back about 20-some minutes later into the locker room, and Jim's sitting next to me, and I'm cut up and got bite marks. And I said, my God, I'm glad. I hope I never have to do that again. About that time, he kicks open the door. And I'd seen this before. I mean, he'd continue it. And I grab my chair, and I'm looking at him, and he's like, and he goes, I respect you. Shook my hand and walked out, and geez, I almost passed out.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Was it hard following your father's footsteps, given that he was a world champion and a major star? Or was
Well,
that...
of course it was.
Yeah.
You know, people always compared you to him. I didn't compare myself to him. I wanted to, you know, I studied a lot from him. I learned from him. So I had a lot of his techniques down. And my other, and a lot I took from Billy Robinson, and I took a lot from Red Bastien. And that's what any good athlete will do. They'll find the people that really kind of gel with their personality and what they want to do, and then you kind of form your own thing. And that's, I never wanted to follow in his footsteps. I wanted to, you know, but I wanted to make my own footsteps. And people always, I remember you'd come out of that tunnel, no matter where we were wrestling, oh, there's that skinny Gagne, but people cheered for me, you know, and I didn't know if I was going to be successful at it or not. I know from being an athlete, I had that desire that I wanted to be the best I possibly could be. And I wanted to, not only for myself, but for my father and my family. And I think I can honestly say that, you know, I gave the people their money's worth every time I was in the ring.
Was it hard to please your father as you were finding your way in the business?
It was hard to please him anytime. Anytime. I had 3 compliments from him in my lifetime. And that's just the way he was. You know, when you wanted something, you know, we always had the wherewithal that if I wanted a new car, yeah, he'd buy me a car, but no. Right. You work for it. I remember the first time I raked leaves. We had this acre lot, and I raked all by myself, all these leaves up, and I was so proud I got them done. He came home and he said, hey, there's a few leaves out there. I said, well, I'll get them. He says, no, you do the whole yard over again. That way, you always do it right the first time, and you earned it. Anything we wanted, my sisters and myself, we had to earn it. My sisters wanted horses, he got them horses, but they had to clean the barn, feed the horses, bathe the horses, you know, they had to shovel the barn out.
Did he have a sense of humor, Vern?
Oh yeah, he had a great sense of humor. But I was getting back to the 3 times that I got compliments from him. First one was in high school. I had a great game, completed 13 out of 15, ran for over 100 yards, and we won the game big. And he said, that's the best football game I've ever seen you play. I'm really proud of you. And then twice in wrestling. Jim and I were wrestling Tito Santana and Rick Martel in the Cow Palace. And the Cow Palace crowd was a tough crowd. The minute we walked out, it was a championship match, we were champions, walked out, and the people, as Martel and Santana go out, they're yelling boring. As we come out, boring. I mean, the match hadn't even started. It took 18 minutes, and after 18 minutes, we had them standing. And we kept them going for we went about 35 minutes then, total. So, and we had them, and we got back in the locker room, and he took the 4 of us in, and he said, I am so proud of you guys, it's the greatest match I've ever seen. You really controlled it out there, and you took a crowd and just built them into, you know, something that, I mean, you know, in a babyface match, they're standing and the place is going crazy. I mean, that's tough to do. Maybe, yeah. And then I wrestled with him as a partner against Bockwinkel and Saito in St. Paul. And we got out of that one, and he said, you are one of the best baby faces we've ever had in the industry. And he said, not because you're my son, just the way you controlled that match out there. So, I mean, that was, you know.
Yeah, that's a huge compliment.
That really is. And those are the only 3 I ever got from him. But you had to earn them with him, boy.
Right.
Yeah.
You had a number of matches with a young Ric Flair. What are your memories of Ric?
Well, I was a young Greg Gagne at the time. I remember that, you know. I wasn't an old guy.
Could you even tell in 1973 that he was going to be great?
I could tell I was. I wasn't sure about Rick.
Right.
No, Rick always had that. Rick, when he came to our camp, he weighed 298 pounds. When he got done, he was 260. So when I wrestled him, he was always at that weight. But I think everybody, Ray Stevens, Nick Bockwinkel, Bobby Heenan, everybody that was on the card would come out and watch our match, the 2 of us.
Yeah.
And we'd be like the first or second match on the card. And you know, they were very good coaches. They'd tell us what we did wrong and to slow it down. I mean, we had a pretty good pace going. And yeah, he was a natural. He really was.
There was also a number of times you were sent to WWF to make some appearances at MSG, the Garden. Talk about the reasoning behind obviously the AWA and the WWF at the time were running different regions. Like, break down why promoters would send talents to other promoters for a one-off.
You know, when they had a big card, the promoters wanted to make it bigger than just New York or their area or the WWF at that time. So they'd bring in some outside talent. And I was lucky to have the opportunity to wrestle in the Garden and wrestle in Shea Stadium. And Jim and I were supposed to come up and wrestle in New York, have a tour, be up here for a year or two. And Jim had just got married and he didn't want to go to New York. So we never made the shot up here.
I think when you went in as a singles, you worked with Jose Estrada, Johnny Rods, and I believe Rick McGraw. Any of those matches stand out at all?
Well, I think I had all pretty good matches with all three of them. You know, I think the first two, they were just kind of, you know, the guys that came in and got people over. And a lot of guys didn't have really good matches with them. They just kind of ate them up. But I was able to at least have really good matches with them, and they were, you know, made them look good, and they made me look good. Any
dealings at all with Vince Sr. at the time, or even Vince Jr.?
Vince Jr., you know, just a hello. Thanks for having me on the card. Vince Sr. always came up, and, you know, I always thanked him for letting me, you know, be on the cards. And
how would you compare the WWF product at the time to what AWA was presenting?
They were two different ball games. They really were. The WWF at that time, their presentation, it was all featured around the world champion, which most areas were. And when the champions and Bruno was on the card, I mean, they always sold out. The underneath cards, though, of the main event, I was never around it that much, but from what I got, the guys didn't really have to work as hard as we did to have a match. I mean, we really worked hard and made it convincing. The WWE's presentation was more that it's a show. And I watched some of the guys that came from the WWF at that time and wrestled for the AWA had a tough time competing and getting to the main events. Pedro Morales is a great example. Huge star here. He came in there and he only made it to about the middle of the cards. But he wasn't used to the competition that he had to have in all the matches. I mean, everybody that went out on the card now, I mean, Vern made you had to make it look like, Pete, you better have a, you know, 15-minute match or better. And you better be solid, you better make those people believe it.
Now, for those that don't know, how did Vern come to power and how did the AWA become its own entity?
Well, Vern started in 1950 on the DuPont Network. It ran for 7 years. WGN had taken it over, and the wrestling was so popular, it ended up being on 7 days a week, and they burned it out. So then you had to pay to get on TV. So what Vern did, he started his own vitamin company. And the whole time Chicago's where they did the TV, but we always lived in Minneapolis, and he'd drive to Chicago every week for that. And in the meantime, they were expanding the territory in Minneapolis. He came back and bought in as a partner in '57. And they were only drawing about 400 people in Minneapolis. His job was to help expand it and get the talent in there and get this thing going. He knew what to do.
Okay.
The guys that ran it, Wally Carbo, Bill Casisto, they were great guys, but they didn't know how to run wrestling. My dad learned what television meant to professional wrestling. So when he got his vitamins going, he ended up getting on in Detroit, sponsored the show in Detroit. He didn't want to be in Detroit, and Bruiser ran it, mostly him and the Sheik. They became partners there. Vern concentrated on the Midwest and West, and that was his goal.
Okay. Members are going to St. Louis for Sam Munchnick and appearing at the Kiel Auditorium. And what was Sam like to work with?
Sam was, you know, a great guy to work for. I mean, he never talked too much, you know. He was the head of everything down there. Pat O'Connor, Bob Geigel, and they were the two that ran most of it, and Harley Race.
If the AWA and the NWA were separate entities back in the early 80s, late 70s, mostly early 80s, you were being sent to St. Louis, I believe, fairly often. What was the backstory there?
Well, here's the problem they had in St. Louis. They drew huge crowds when it was a championship match. If they didn't have the champions on the card, which the NWA at that time couldn't get them, every other month, then their gates went way down. They'd go from a sellout to maybe half a house. And Sam Muchnick approached Vern, him and Geigel, would he like to buy into St. Louis with them, become a partner, and how do we get this so we can keep it consistent? Our Denver was sold out almost every time, St. Paul, Milwaukee, Chicago, Winnipeg. How do you keep it so steady when you don't have your championship match all the time? Well, you learn to build all your other things underneath, and the tag team champions meant as much as that. So they brought Jim and I in there. We had just won the championship, or in the process, from Duncombe and Lanza. And Lanza was pretty big down in St. Louis, and Bobby Heenan. So we put our TV show in there along with the St. Louis one. So got the AWA and our people established.
Right.
So we wrestled and wrestled and wrestled, and Jim and I were really getting established in St. Louis, and then they brought in Lanza and Duncombe to face us. So what does Geigel and Sam do? They bring us in the same night Briscoe wrestles Harley. But they put Harley and Briscoe on before us. And we went in after them, and I tell you, we had that place rocking. We tore the place in that big ring, and that was tough to do. And that was our last appearance there. For a lot of reasons.
Any of the reasons you want to go into, or?
Well, no. They didn't utilize it. They could have put us in with Lanza and Duncombe the following month.
Right.
And probably sold the joint out. You can tell as an athlete when you get in the ring if the people are there, what they're there to see.
Yeah.
And we knew. And then what they paid us afterwards, we said, why are we missing Denver and Milwaukee for St. Louis when, in one night there we make 10 or 15 times more than what they paid us here.
Right. Political and all that kind of.
It was very political, and they really, it made you realize that they didn't really want what they wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted their guys established. Same thing, Jim Barnett brought Jim and I to Atlanta. We were supposed to go down there and have a big match with Bob Orton and Dick Slater. They were their champions. So our first week there, the second night we're in Columbus, Georgia. And they put us against Rip Hawk and Dr. Jerry Graham. At that time, they were on their way out. And all they were used for was the guys to get over. And we went in and had about a 24, 25-minute match with them and tore the place apart. And nobody could really follow the match after that. So what did they do? They booked us against Bob Backlund and Jerry Briscoe for the next 2.5 weeks.
Right.
And they turned Slater and Orton babyface. So we never got to meet them.
Yeah.
It's because of the bookers down there. They had their guys they were pushing, and they didn't want anybody to steal the show.
Yeah. Who was booking at the time? Was it Ole?
No.
It was
no,
before.
it wasn't. It would have been Ole. We'd have been in there.
Yeah.
It was, I want to say Gary Hart.
Okay.
Was he a manager for Jardine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How often would there be communication between the top three promotions on a weekly basis back in the 70s and the 80s, before the national expansion of WWF? Were the offices ever communicating at all? Or
oh yeah,
really?
they did about talent.
Yeah.
Like Vince Senior. He would see who was hot here. Superstar Billy Graham was real hot, and Vern said, it'd be a good one for Bruno. So then they'd send Billy in to do TVs for 6 months, and then he was established there. In the meantime, he'd work for us. And that's the way they brought him in.
Why is it that you rarely went outside of the AWA beyond the dates that we discussed? Was there any other territories that you wanted to go?
I would have liked to have, wrestled in Atlanta a little bit. I would have loved to have been in the New York area because of the exposure you got there. But the kind of money we were making, we couldn't make it anywhere else. You couldn't make it in Tennessee. You couldn't make that in Florida. You couldn't make it in North Carolina. I mean, those guys, it was a grind for those guys. Not that they weren't doing well. In North Carolina, they did really well. They came in, the Crockett's came in when they took over and actually watched our TV and saw how we did it and took that footprint back with them. They were doing fantastic, and the guys were making really good money, but they were working 366 days of the year and a lot of double shots. We were working 220 to 250 and making as much or more than they were.
Yeah.
You know, so my father, the big thing was you had to have time for your family. And in the Midwest, and you know, from Winnipeg to St. Louis to the West Coast, in May, everybody was outdoors. They didn't want to come into an arena. So we got 6 weeks off. We got all of May and the first 2 weeks in June, and then we had, you know, a few little shots in some of the smaller towns, and the major cities would run every month, but we wouldn't draw really big. And I can give you a really good example of that. Hogan wrestled. We wrestled in April in Minneapolis, or in St. Paul, and we sold out the Civic Center at the time, 22,000 people. The building next door, we had another 8 in that closed circuit the match. It was him and Bockwinkel, and I think Vernon Mad Dog against Ventura and Adonis, I believe is what it was.
Right.
And it was a strong card. Well, Hogan came back and we took May off. He said, book May. He said, I'm red hot. We went from I think it was a $180,000 gate to a $30,000 gate. And that was Hogan in the main event.
All right.
And that was May. Proved to him when we told him, hey, we just don't run. You don't do it. We can't draw.
When did you first meet Jim Brunzell, and what led to you guys being put together as the High Flyers?
Well, we met in college, our freshman year. Jim was from White Bear Lake. I was from Mound. I was a quarterback. He was a running back receiver. So we played our freshman year. We became really good friends. And my sophomore year, I was moved to defensive back and kickoff returns, and I wanted to play quarterback. And Jerry Reichow, who was a scout for the Vikings, he told me to go out to Wyoming. He said they wanted me. They had recruited me out of high school, and they gave me a full scholarship to come out there. Murray gave me my release, Murray Warmath. Stayed in contact with Jim. Jim played semi-pro football after college, and I called him. I said, hey, Jim, my dad's going to have this big training camp in September. I think you should give it a shot. Jim said, I don't know anything about wrestling. I said, well, you're a good athlete, you pick it up. So Jim came and gave it a shot.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
Memories of your feud with Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens?
Phenomenal. I mean, you know, we had a TV match against Bockwinkel and Stevens, and I got racked up pretty good on that one. I was laid up for a month or so. In the meantime, Jim teamed up with Larry Henning, and they had these matches. Well, they didn't know what they had with Jim and I. They weren't sure, and I don't think we were sure. So they put us in Peoria, Illinois against Nick and Ray. And it was in a high school gym. It seated about 4,000. They'd always draw maybe 1,000, 1,500 people down there. You know, it wasn't huge.
Right.
So Jim and I go down there against Nick and Ray. And my God, you can't get in the parking lot. You can't get in the building. They had 4,000 people in there that night. And with Nick and Ray, we could, you can't help but have a great match.
Yeah.
And that's when the promoters around the country realized that we were, you know, even though with our size and everything, we had something special.
Ray, one of the best workers you've been in the ring with?
Ray?
Ray Stevens?
Timing-wise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about Nick?
Nick was very good too. Nick didn't quite have the timing that Ray did, but Nick was such a veteran, and I remember wrestling Nick in Omaha, Nebraska to an hour draw, and Pat Patterson told me it was the greatest hour draw he'd ever seen in wrestling. So, you know, Nick was phenomenal.
What about your memories of working with Jesse Ventura and Adrian Adonis? And what were they like behind the scenes?
Well, you know what? Adrian Adrian carried the team. Jesse could talk to people in the building, and Adrian carried the match in the ring. Adrian was phenomenal in the ring. There weren't too many as good as him. He was that good.
What are your thoughts on Jesse's political career?
You know, he talked himself into the governorship. I told you he was a good talker. He could talk anybody into the building. He talked himself right into the governorship.
Did you stay close with Jesse at all over the years?
Jesse's a hard guy to get close to. You know, he doesn't talk to too many people. My father passed away recently, and we did get a really nice bouquet of flowers from the governor, Ventura is what it was on the card, and his beautiful wife. No address, no phone number, so I haven't been able to send him a thank you
Jesse.
card.
He doesn't want you.
So Jesse, if you ever watch this, thank you.
You defeated Bobby Duncum Sr. and Blackjack Lanza to win the AWA tag titles. I believe it was in '77, and then you guys feuded with them in a series of rematches. Memories of that feud?
Oh, well, you know, with Bobby Heenan in their corner, and they were, Lanza and Duncum together were a big, devastating team, and outstanding to be in the ring with. I mean, Duncum was a phenomenal athlete, played pro football, and I remember the first time Jim and I wrestled him, him and Heenan in Moline, Illinois. And Duncum used to come off these ropes and just, with all this tremendous power. And I said, well, Jim, watch, I'm going to catch him with a drop kick as soon as he turns.
Right.
So he hit the ropes, and I hit him, and Jesus, the next thing I know, I'm out on the floor, and Jim's laughing his ass up. I said, what the hell happened? He said, you hit him like with that drop kick. He went out over the top rope. You looked like an arrow. You went straight out through the other side of the ring. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun getting in the ring with him.
You had mentioned Bobby Heenan. To me, is one of the greatest managers in the business.
Without a doubt, the best, bar none. Bobby had. He's one of the few managers. Most managers knew how to get themselves over.
Yeah.
Bobby got himself over. He got his team over, and he got the team they were working against, or the individual they were working against. He was phenomenal. Nobody better or quicker witted than Bobby Heenan, bar none.
What did he mean to the AWA business?
He was phenomenal. I mean, he added the spark to Bockwinkel and Ray. Ray wasn't a great interviewer. Nick was okay, but with Heenan, he was fantastic, and it made the two of them fantastic.
What was he like behind the scenes?
Bobby?
Yeah.
Just like you saw him on TV, smart ass. I mean, I got so many Bobby Heenan stories. Denver, Colorado, we used to wrestle Friday night. Saturday morning, we had to get the early flight out and go back to Minneapolis. Bobby would have Nick and Ray, he'd get to the airport and they'd get him out of the cab, and they'd have a wheelchair for him.
Right.
They'd wheel him down so he could get on the plane first. A lot of times he'd get first class. But Denver, he liked to sit in the back. So he'd get on the plane first, he'd go in and do his thing in the men's room, and then he'd lock the doors. And it was a breakfast flight, an hour and 45 minutes from Denver to Minneapolis. So you'd see people turning around and looking, wanting to get up, and people lined up and nobody could get back there. And then they'd have the breakfast, everybody sit down, they'd have their coffee. People were turning around, and Bobby, when the time was right, when the stewardess was right in front of him, he'd get up and go in the bathroom again. He'd let Nick and whoever else was back there get in the bathroom, and he'd come out and he'd lock the doors again. Hour and 45 minutes, nobody could get in the bathroom. And this went every month from Denver.
That is awesome.
Yeah. You'd see people run off that plane, flying for the bathrooms.
You went, I believe, to All Japan in '82, I think it was. What are your memories of working for Giant Baba?
Giant Baba, actually, my first trip to Giant Baba was 1973, our first year in wrestling. I was there with Blackjack Mulligan, Moose Cholak, Dale Lewis, Larry Hainimi, or Lars Anderson, and then two guys from South Africa, and Bob Bruggers and myself. Bob and I had trained together. This is our first trip to Japan. We're getting like $1,500 a week. The main eventers, they're getting whatever they're getting.
Right.
A lot of money. So we're there for 6 weeks. And you would learn your symbol in Japanese. So you'd come in and they'd have it up on the wall, and you'd see, okay, I'm on the second match. You had no idea who you were wrestling, but you're on the second match or third match. So Bob's looking one day, he says, I can't find myself. I said, well, shit, you're in the main event. You're in a cage match against their local guy. He said, I've never wrestled a cage match. Now in 1973, when you wrestled in Japan, when you came out, they clapped for everybody. The geezer girls gave you the flowers, confetti came down.
Yep.
When the match started, it was dead silent. Dead frickin' silent. When the match was over, they would clap. Damnedest thing, you had 20,000 people in there and could hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was. So Bob gets into this cage match, and I go to Bob and I said, Mr. Bubba, Bob's never been in a cage, you know, and I've been around wrestling a lot. Can I go out and be his manager? Okay. So I go out and being his manager. And all of a sudden, Bob is getting the shit kicked out of him. He gets cut. And I remember Bobby Heenan, you have to keep pacing, you know, and I didn't know what the Japanese are going to do. And all of a sudden, I see something on the ground, I hand it to Bob, and I said, hit him over the eye. Boom, he hits him over the eye, and the guy starts bleeding. All of a sudden, I see this fan jump over the railing, and now all the people are standing, and there's noise. And I turned and looked at him, and he turned around, and I kicked him right in the ass, and he went over the railing.
Right.
Right? So now I'm pacing, and all of a sudden a whiskey bottle goes flying by me. I go, holy shit. So all of a sudden, the match ends, Bob gets beat, and these people are all standing. And I mean, the noise is unbelievable. I crawl in over the cage, and I go over to Bob, I'm gonna help him up, and all of a sudden, I see something like corner of my eye, I look up, and a chair came over and hit me. And now I'm bleeding. And I see the guy, I grab the chair, I run up the top rope, and he's running. I fire the chair, and I hit him right behind the head. About 10,000 chairs started flying into the ring. And Bob says, what the fuck are we gonna do? I said, well, let's get out of here. So we run through the people, and we get our arms up like this, and we were black and blue from here down, from them hitting us. And we see Mulligan come out, and they had this big balcony. He's gonna save us. He comes out, and I see this little Japanese guy that stand up and go, hit Bob right on top of the head, knocked him cold.
Oh.
So we drag him into the locker room, and a full-fledged riot starts.
That's crazy.
Rocks coming through the windows. The riot squads are there. So the next 3 weeks, Bob and I are in the main event every night. And we couldn't go into a restaurant without getting attacked.
That's insane, because that's crazy for Japan, too.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
They gave us a bonus at the end, but we were supposed to go to Australia, and all the other guys wanted to go home, so we had to go home. We missed the Australian trip.
You actually had a chance to work opposite of Ricky Steamboat, I believe, in a six-man. I don't know if you remember one of the tours. I believe that was in '82, though. What was that like being in the ring with Ricky?
Well, I worked with Ricky actually in Japan.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it was a tag team match.
Yep. Six-man, I think.
Yeah, no, it was just it was him, and they had a new young kid that they were really grooming, and we had a great match. I mean, I helped train Ricky.
I think there was also, didn't you and Jim work Ricky and Jay Youngblood? Maybe over in Japan as well. I'm almost positive it was like a 30-minute draw.
We may have. Yeah. I don't remember that match. Okay. I remember the other one, because this little Japanese guy, he had this. We were in the Tokyo Dome, and it was sold out, and they had you sat on cement risers, and he came flying out of the ring. He had that thing where he'd fly out and hit you with his head.
Right.
And I just saw him coming out of the corner of my eye, and I ducked, and he went straight into the concrete, busted him wide open. And then he got up, and I forget what happened, but we ended up beating him and almost had a riot there.
He and Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, are often mentioned in the same breath as probably some of the best workers in the ring. Mm-hmm. Who do you think was superior as a worker, Ricky or Rick?
Rick.
Rick? Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I really honestly didn't see Ricky work that much. Steamboat. I helped train him, so I want to say he was, but I think Rick's timing, you know, it all comes to me. Your classic guys, the guys that were really the best, are the ones that had the timing,
right?
When to do something, when not to do it. Ricky, when I watched him a few times, was very methodical. A very good, excellent worker, believe me. I'm not taking it away from him, but when you're asking me to compare that, I think Flair in his prime.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. What led to the end of the High Flyers? And were you upset when Jim Brunzell went to WWF?
The only thing I got upset about, we had a big match coming up with the Road Warriors in Winnipeg. And he had the opportunity to go to New York. And, you know, I think with everybody, and my father either, we didn't get mad at anybody leaving, but fulfill your commitments before you leave.
Right.
You know, a lot of guys, the only guy that left the AWA and went with McMahon that fulfilled his commitments was, come on, you know everything.
It's got to be Hogan.
No.
No.
He didn't fulfill them. He missed the last 5 big sellouts.
Who would that be?
Come on, I'm testing you.
Trying to think.
We talked about him earlier.
Bobby Heenan.
Yep. Only one.
Out of respect to your dad?
And for the business.
And for the business.
Yeah. He fulfilled all his commitments. Told Vern he was going to leave. Vern said, okay, we got these. He said, don't worry, I'm going to make all my commitments. And he did. Ventura walked out. Hogan walked out. Jim left, didn't fulfill his commitment. That's the only guy. I mean, Jim and I are good friends. I mean, but...
When guys would walk out on your father, would your father have poker face, or did he sell for them?
Well, no, he was mad that they didn't fulfill their commitments. I mean, my father grew up in an age, you know, back in the Depression. And he always told us, one thing in life, if your word and your handshake don't mean anything, you're not much of a man. And that's your contract. Your handshake and your word are your contract. You live by that, you die by it. And that's what he lived by it and ended up dying in business because of it.
We're going to talk about that coming up too. Memories of working with Jerry Blackwell?
Phenomenal. Jerry was, when you looked at him, you'd think, oh my God, you know, how can I have a match with this guy? We had phenomenal match. He had some of the greatest timing for his style and his size of anybody I'd ever been in the ring with. I remember the first time I wrestled him in Rockford, Illinois alone. And again, it's August, it's hot, and this gym is full, and they got the fluorescent lights. And I'm in the laugh. I said, 15 minutes, he'll be stepping on his tongue.
Right.
45 minutes later, I'm still in the ring with him, and I'm dying.
You actually had a chance to challenge for the AWA title a number of times, but you never ended up with the belt. Were you disappointed that your father never booked you to have a run with the title?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
You knew your spot pretty much? Or?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I knew. I think there were some promoters around that really wanted me to have it, but I didn't feel that was, you know, that wasn't. If I'd have been 225 pounds, yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, some of the people you had to work with, I mean, I remember having to work with Brody, you know, and I'm going, how in the shit can I work with? I mean, we wrestled him in Japan.
He was my next question, so you could talk all about him. Yep.
So Jim and I are in Japan. They bring us over for 2 weeks for a big tournament. The night before we wrestled in Salt Lake City in a cage match with the Sheik and Blackwell fired me over the top rope, and my knee twisted, and it burned, but you know, you finish the match. The next day we fly to LA. I wake up in LA and my knee is like that, and we got 2 weeks for this big tournament. Fly to Japan, we get to Tokyo, jump on the plane, go to Sapporo, we dress in the cab, we have our first match that night, my knee's all taped up. We went about 15 minutes. The next night we have Saruda and Jumbo Saruda and Tenaru, an hour draw. The next night we have Giant Bubba and Dory Funk Sr. We go 45 minutes with them and we got the win. The next night we got Hanson and Brody. We get in the ring and these people are, Brody and Hanson are really established in Japan and they're wild over there. And I mean, there's no frickin' rules at all. So we're in the ring and I got my back to their locker room. And all of a sudden I see Jim's eyes get like, he says, oh, look out. And I get hit with a frickin' cowbell. Out of the ring. Jim gets hit with a chain. We're both out of the ring. Through the people, into the wall, we get hit with a fire extinguisher. Both of us got cut right away. We're going back to the ring and we're fighting our way back. And all of a sudden I see this folding chair folded down. I pick it up and Hanson comes running at me and I kind of frisbeed it. Right. And I hit him right on the bridge of the nose. His nose exploded and down he went. Well, we went 20-some minutes with these two, and we got in the locker room. My arms were black and blue from hitting them. And that's my first experience with Brody and Hanson. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, easy to work with? I guess not.
Well, then Brody came into Minneapolis, you know, and something happened. He wanted to work with me. And I said, I don't want to work with you. I said, there's no way. I can't make people believe that I can, you know, don't worry about it. Shit, I don't know why he picked on me, but he said, you have fire. He said, you have a lot of fire, and that's what I want from a baby face. He worked with Slaughter. He walked out of the ring, and with Blackwell, but he'd go in there with me.
No problem.
And I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was a problem. I mean, you got the shit kicked out of you.
Right.
You know, yeah. I didn't want to do it, but, you know, it was nice that he thought that much of my ability to want to put me in there.
What was Frank like outside the ring?
I wasn't around him that much. I really wasn't.
Okay.
You know, he was kind of in and out.
Yeah.
He'd get out right. Yeah, everywhere. I mean, that's just the way he was.
Andre would come in occasionally as a special attraction for your father. Memories of spending time with Andre, inside or outside the ring?
He came in every year in October. That kicked off. See, we came out of our summer months. September was just so-so, and then October kicked it off, and he had Battle Royals. We had Andre for a month. So they booked us every night. And we wrestled in St. Paul. And after the matches in St. Paul, we'd go over to Mancini's restaurant bar. The old Italian guy, Nick Mancini, ran it, and his two sons. And they'd have the room set up in the back. And Andre came in there. And he drank a couple bottles of wine. He drank a bottle of cognac. He kept drinking. They closed the place at 1 o'clock. We left. Andre was there, and Nick Mancini said, Wally Carboy's going to take him home. He says, don't worry, I'll take care of Andre. And and Nick had bought this brand new Cadillac. So Nick was telling a story. Andre was there till 4 in the morning. He said, we go, and he gets in the car, he lays back, and he breaks my seat in my brand new car. And he's laying in the back of the seat, and I don't know how to get him back up. Right. He said, I couldn't get him into the hotel room and beat us. But that, you know, that was one fond memory of Andre. There was a lot of them, though. He was a great guy.
Memories of working and teaming with Wahoo McDaniel?
Wahoo, he was a character. I mean, he was always fast-paced. Bobby Heenan had the greatest interview I'd ever heard. Wahoo came out of football, and at that time in football, they took a lot of bennies. Right. And he still took them in wrestling. So he's wrestling Nick Bockwinkel for the championship. And Marty O'Neill is interviewing Bockwinkel and then Heenan. And Heenan, you know, he said, you know, Wahoo was a great athlete, and you had to train Nick very hard for this match. And all of a sudden, Bobby jumps in. Yeah, he says, hey, Marty, you know, Wahoo hasn't been asleep since 1957.
That's awesome. That's a good line. Yeah. I'm going to mention some names real quickly from the 80s. Just give me your thoughts on some of the guys and girls. Sherry Martel?
She was terrific. Yeah.
Larry Nelson? Announcer.
Larry, he was a good announcer.
What are your memories of a young Scott Hall?
No different than when he got older. You know, we brought him into the AWA. He was struggling, not making it. We pushed him hard, and he had all the tools, but he knew everything about everything before he, you know.
He wouldn't listen.
He wouldn't listen.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What about Bill and Scott Irwin?
Good. They were, you know, I played football with Bill. Or not Bill,
Scott.
Scott. Played football with him. Good performers. Good performers. For some reason, never really got over with the public to draw the big money.
Yeah. Nord the Barbarian? The Berserker?
Yeah, I mean, he was just out of control. I mean, it was too bad. He had so much potential.
Out of control in what aspect? Behind the scenes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, after the matches. I mean, we had a great setup in Denver. We stayed at a hotel right across from the arena. And I mean, they were paying $17 a night, you know, but we drew in a lot of people at a bar there afterwards.
Right.
His first time there, he destroys the room, breaks mirrors in the hallway, and, you know, almost got us thrown out. It was either him or us, so they had to let him go.
What are your memories of Ken Resnick?
Ken, he was kind of he was okay. Never really a great announcer for us, but he did a good job.
Of course, Mean Gene Okerlund.
Well, Gene learned from Marty O'Neill, and Marty was the best, and Gene turned out to be the best of his era, and still is.
Let me ask you, when Gene left the company, did he give notice, and was that a...
No.
Okay.
No, but Gene actually, you know, I asked Gene to do the eulogy at my father's funeral. He did the first half, I did the second half. He did a fantastic job.
Rick Martel.
Rick was a good, very, I don't know what the right word is. He was
solid babyface.
He was solid, but for something lacked with Rick.
Charisma?
There you go.
You didn't want to say it, or?
I didn't want to say it.
Okay.
Rick might see this.
Right.
He'd get mad at me.
Yeah.
But that was it. I mean, he just, you know, they wanted a young guy to have the belt. Bockwinkel wanted Martel to have it. There was other people that didn't see that. They didn't think he would draw the money. That's when a couple of promoters wanted me to have it, and I just, no.
When Nick would suggest that, you know, he wanted Rick to have the belt, and he would approach your father about that, would your father open to listening to other people's ideas?
Yeah.
Okay.
The way we booked, Vern was at the head, then we'd have about 4 or 5 of us there. Bockwinkel, Heenan, Lanza, Wally Carbo, myself, and we'd throw out ideas, and then he would make the final decision on it.
Okay.
And that's the way it worked.
Okay. Steve Regal, early memories of Mr. Electricity.
Yeah, he was a good performer. He was really good and a good talker.
The Midnight Rockers, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty.
Well, I put them together, so I better be. They were. I saw footage of both of them. They had sent it in. They wanted to come, and I thought, God damn it! We need a new young team. If we put these two together, it could really click. And Vern said, well, who's the better of the two? And I said, well, right now they're about even, but I think Shawn has the more potential of the two. And put them together, and they had Buddy Rose and
Doug Summers.
Doug Summers, and those two were pretty good hands, and they knew how to get the young guys over, and they did. They did a good job.
Did you see the potential in Shawn early on?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You knew?
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew right away. I thought to him as a team, it was just Jannetty had outside of the ring problems that, you know, sometimes carried on into the ring, and that was his downfall. Right. Unfortunately, because he was really a good guy, and he had so much potential.
I'm going to talk about the 80s and some of the talent raids that went on with the AWA, starting with Hulk Hogan. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot written and said about the WWF talent raids. What was your father's side of the story when Hulk took Vince's offer?
Here's how it went down, okay? Hogan was booked, and my father had called Vince Sr. We had our battle royals I was telling you about in the fall. And we're in St. Paul, and Andre and Hogan bumped into each other, their backs, and there was only maybe 4, 5, 6 guys left. And they both turned slowly, and those people just went, whoo. And my dad said, okay, here's what we're going to do. And he sat Hogan down. He called Vince Sr. He said, I want Andre for February. So we had Andre for February. This was of, what, 82 or 83, whenever it all started there. And he said, Hulk, here's what we're going to do. When you come back, we've got Christmas week. We have St. Paul, San Francisco, Chicago, Milwaukee, one of other major cities. We had 6 cities. They were all sold out. And we were in 6-man tag team matches. We're going to end up booking you and Andre in February with the winner to get a shot at the title. We're going to run that in all the cities. And Hogan was right there, and Andre was in Phoenix with us. Our last night was Phoenix. And Andre was a little hard to work with that night. He was a little belligerent and drinking, and he wouldn't talk to people. And we go, well, what's wrong with him? My dad said, he went up to him, big man, what's the matter? Get away from me. And that's the first time he'd ever said that to Vern. What's wrong with the guy? Hogan then went to Japan. And then we got it was about the 18th or 19th of December, we got a telegram from Tampa, Florida, that Hogan wasn't coming back. And my dad thought him and Eddie Graham used to pull jokes on each other. Right. And Eddie had been on a hunting trip with my dad where he couldn't find them up in Alaska or up in the Arctic where they were hunting and hired a helicopter and everything. And he thought it was a rib. He went back to Tampa. So my dad thought, Eddie's getting me back. So he just threw it away. All of a sudden, Christmas night, Hogan doesn't show up in St. Paul. And I called Hulk. I said, hey, what are you doing? Well, I sent the telegram. I said, oh, my dad didn't think it was, he thought it was from Eddie Graham. Thought you were just thinking around. No, I'm done. I said, well, hey, fulfill your commitment. You got we got 6 nights here. Just fulfill that and then go. And he said, no, I got a commitment with Vince McMahon, and I'm not going to do it.
Did he have any contract at the time with your father, or was it just a handshake deal? Okay.
Yeah. Nobody had contracts in those days. It was all a handshake, you know. And if your handshake and your word weren't good, like I said, you weren't any good.
Was it true that they were fighting over T-shirt money and maybe like a percentage of Japanese bookings? Did you?
No. The biggest thing was Hogan wanted to be the champion, and they had a match that one I told you about in St. Paul, and he didn't win the championship that night, and he was kind of pouting about that. But Nick had a commitment with Bubba as the champion, so he couldn't do anything with it then, because Hogan had an agreement with Inoki. He had been going to Inoki.
Yeah.
So we couldn't switch any titles or anything at that time. But he didn't tell that to Hogan. He just said, no, it's not right. I can't do it. So then that kind of pissed Hogan off a little bit. What the whole strategy was, we were going for that big one we're going to take him and Andre around all the major cities, then Hogan and Bockwinkel, and that's when he would get the title. But Vern never told anybody what he was doing ahead of time, because then it got in the reg sheets and everything else. So he was a big, kayfabe that way.
Right.
Everything was kept tight.
What are your memories of the bloodbath in St. Paul with Hogan and Schultz?
I don't remember it that much. Schultz was an oddball too. It drew money, and it would have drawn a lot, but Schultz was a little tough to do business with, I think.
Now, after Hogan left, the big story, and everybody knows about it, was that your father allegedly called the Iron Sheik and offered to pay him to break Hogan's leg.
Never.
No truth behind that at all?
Yeah. I'd like to see Khosrow. Khosrow started that thing. No way.
Okay.
No way. That never happened ever.
We've done a lot of interviews with a lot of different guys, including Mean Gene and a lot of other talents. A lot of people talk about the story with Vince and your father with the phone call, offering to buy AWA for $1 million.
It wasn't a phone call. Actually, it wasn't $1 million. There was nothing like that.
Okay.
Vince came in the spring of '82. I believe that, if my date's right. I know he came in the spring, and he talked to my father. I was there with him about wanting to buy us out. He said, I've got a plan, and I'd like to buy you out. And Vern said, well, Vince, here's my problem. I've got partners in Chicago. I got a partner in Denver. I got partners in Winnipeg. I got a partner here, and I got a partner in Milwaukee and Green Bay. I have to meet with them and see what they want to do. So we talked for a couple hours, and I said, I see, why you would want it, so then you can expand your television market and you can sell your ads nationally when you have a national program. And he said, give me till August. So Vince came back in August, and Vern threw a number at him, and he said, let me think about it. The number wasn't $1 million. It was a lot more than that, and it was worth more than $1 million.
Right.
Believe me. I mean, it was major cities. It was the St. Louis TV. It was Chicago, Milwaukee, Green Bay, Winnipeg, Omaha, all the Dakotas, Denver, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Las Vegas, San Francisco. That's major markets. And we were on TSN throughout Canada. We were in Toronto and Vancouver, along with Winnipeg. And so he gave him the number, and Vince said, okay, let me think about it. We talked for a couple hours. We drove Vince to the airport. He got out of the car, and as he's walking away, he turns around and he says, I don't negotiate. And he turns around and walks away. My dad said, what? What did he say? He said, I don't negotiate. What does he mean by that? I don't know. We never heard from him again until That was August till December when the big move came.
How did your father take that big move?
Oh, he was pissed. I mean, if Hogan would have made his shots and then left, wouldn't have had a problem with it at all. And that's what I told Hulk. And I told Hulk that night, I said, well, why didn't you say something to us? Why wouldn't you? We were in Phoenix together. Well, Andre got on a plane with me, and he convinced me on the way over to Japan, and then apparently McMahon came over there. And I said, well, Terry, why wouldn't you talk about it? Because there was a big future here for you. And I knew I was going to eventually take it over. And I told him, and I convinced my dad to give him a piece of the business. He's, you know, you have to earn it.
Right.
I said, well, you know, okay, but that's what I would recommend. And that's what we were going to do. And I told him, he said, why didn't you tell me sooner? I said, why didn't you talk to us sooner? I mean, why would you do that? You know?
Have you guys ever had a chance to really talk about it after the fact, over the years?
Hulk?
Yeah, you and Hulk.
Well, I got him into Turner Broadcasting, no matter what Ric Flair says. I was the one that got him there. And we never really talked about it because there was no need to.
Past is the past.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you ever get an offer to leave at all by Vince?
Not by Vince, by my partner and by Gene Okerlund and a couple other people. And I said, how could I walk out on my father?
Right.
I mean, are you kidding me? I told my dad way back, and I think this one hurt more, and I've never shared it with too many people. I probably shouldn't share it here. We were standing outside the office, and I said, Dad, you and Mom can live the rest of your life comfortably. Why don't we just close her down? And he said, you're a quitter. And I said, I'm not a quitter, but I know that we can't compete with him with the money he's got behind him. We can't do it. It's just you and I. So I said, okay, I'll stay till the end. And then we had put together a great big deal with WGN. We had worked 4 years on it, spent all our money on it. They were going to put us on all the tribute stations, WPIX, KTLA in LA, the one in New Orleans, the one in Atlanta and Chicago, WGN. And they were going to be our partners, and they also had a piece, was the pay-per-view on at that time. What's the name of the company? Anyhow, they owned it. So we were bringing Hogan in. We'd worked 4 years on this. We had ESPN paid us to be on the program. That's what kept us going.
Right.
They said, give us all the commercial time on ESPN. So we pulled all the spots, gave it to WGN. Their guy had it. Went to New York. Hogan was going to sign with us. He was going to sign a $6 million contract with us, with WGN. And the day we got there to go in for the meeting, they said, our newspapers went on strike. We don't know how long they're going to be out. We can't do the deal now. Now we've lost all our commercial time with ESPN. We have nothing. We were done. That is the true, real story of what went down.
I appreciate
No matter whatever else you hear from anybody, I was there with both Vince, Vern, and when the whole thing went down, and that's the way it went down.
Any regrets around that period of time?
Pardon me?
Any regrets over
My only regret was I wish I could have gone up to the WWE, because it cost me dearly. My family, I put them in a real tough situation because, you know, used up everything we had saved and condominiums I had in Florida that I sold to keep us going. Put them in a real bad financial situation, which, you know.
Yeah. How important were the Road Warriors in the battles as WWF expanded?
Well, you know, they were kind of, they came after the battles got going, really. You know, they weren't in the prime time, for us anyhow.
Yeah.
But they helped us keep going. But they were, and I think Joe will tell you this, they were a little hard to work with.
Everyone says that.
Yeah.
Back then.
Back then. I mean, Joe now today says, you know, I didn't realize, and he said, you know, I took you and Jim for granted, but they were some of the best matches we ever had. He told me that one day. He said, And to this day, I just, I apologize.
Looking back, what mistakes do you think the AWA made in the battles against WWF, if any?
Well, the only mistakes was, but nobody knew at that time. You should have had everybody under contract. But nobody else did it.
Right.
That's the way wrestling ran. So you couldn't foresee that coming. And all the other promoters around the country really didn't think Vince could do it. And I don't think he could have done it without Hogan. I know he couldn't have.
Talk about why your father decided to team with other companies and create Pro Wrestling USA. And why do you feel
Well, it was all the promoters started calling.
Right.
Vince this and Vince that. Hey, we all bind together. And then so Vern said, well, okay, we'll be in with that. But, it was really...
Too many egos?
Well, it was really hard because what you have to do is, like I told you when we did our booking, somebody had the final say. And nobody trusted each other.
Yeah.
Was the funny thing. I mean, it was too bad because I think it could have worked if you'd have just said, okay, so-and-so, you're going to run it. But which ego would have let run it? Crockett's wouldn't let you run it. They wanted to run their thing. Crockett's, Jesus, we formed this deal. We got a big match in Comiskey Park, did a good house. They're in there that night trying to sign all the AWA guys to contracts, all the AWA guys to contracts. Jerry Black, come on with us.
Yeah. You talked briefly about it. Break down how the AWA TV shows was syndicated prior to cable spreading nationally.
Well, every week we did our wrestling program out of Minneapolis. We taped it, and then you would cut separate interviews for each market, and we'd have five interview slots, 2-minute slots for interviews to plug whether you're coming to Denver or you're the card in Omaha or Milwaukee, wherever it's going to be. So then they would put those interviews into that tape and send it to the station we were working with in Denver or San Francisco, wherever.
How did the ESPN deal for AWA come about? And do you think the company was able to make the most of that deal with ESPN?
If they'd have come early, well, here, what happened to us earlier? Okay, I just want to backtrack a little bit. CBS came to us when Hogan was in Japan and said, we want to do every once a quarter a match on CBS network.
That would have been huge.
But we have to have Hogan. So that was in the mix that Hogan didn't know about because he was in Japan. That they came to us in early December, and they wanted to start the first one in February. I thought, well, shit, that'd be great because we got Andre then.
Right.
We can have that match on network TV, on CBS.
That would have been what, 82?
83.
83, okay.
February of 83.
Okay. Larry Nelson wrote in his book that Vern didn't even have a cable at the time and never watched the show. Do you think your father had a grasp of how much technology was changing the TV and wrestling landscapes?
Well, he watched it. He'd come over to my house and watch it.
Okay.
He didn't have cable at home, but he had it, He knew what was going on. I don't think any of us knew what the impact cable would have at that time. I mean, if we all would have, we'd invested in it.
What led to AWA getting, I believe it was up in New York City, WPIX, since that was really so far outside of the AWA area? Were you guys looking to expand?
Well, no, we went in there because McMahon had come into our area.
Okay, so it was just...
And that was part of WGN. They put us on at WPIX, and that gave us the outlet there with USA Wrestling to promote the Meadowlands. We couldn't get into the Garden, but the Meadowlands.
I remember that.
And put a thorn in Vince's side like he was putting in everybody else's.
Memories of teaming with your dad against Mr. Saito and Nick Bockwinkel.
Oh, I told you about that one earlier.
Okay, that was that one. Okay.
That was the one, yeah. I tell you that Nick hit Vern with a chair when the match was over, and I mean he was out on the floor. I thought he killed him. His eyes were just glared, and boy, he whacked him a good one.
Speaking of Mr. Saito, what are your memories of the thoughts of when him and Ken got in some legal battle, legal troubles? I'm sorry.
Well, it was Ken's doing, and poor Saito, it fell back on him. Did you ever hear the story of it?
You could tell about maybe some people. I know it, but some people might not know about it.
So they're in Milwaukee, and I think they're in Green Bay the next day or wherever they are. And the match is over, and he goes to a McDonald's to get a hamburger, and the guy says, "We're closed." He said, "Well, I just want to buy a couple of hamburgers from you." "No, we're closed. We can't do it." "Well, you got some there. Just sell them to me." "I can't do it." So the guy, he's out back throwing them away. He says, what do you mean you can't? Don't throw them away. Give them to me. He says, I can't give them to you. So Ken turns around. He had probably been drinking, threw a rock through the window. So he goes back to the hotel room, and he gets in there, and Saito's already in there and in bed. And Ken's on the phone with his wife, and there's a knock on the door. And Ken's on the phone. He says, Saito, can you get that? And Saito's still watching. Another knock and another knock. Saito comes to the door, and Saito is naked. And he opens the door, and he sees a female policeman there and another cop, and he shuts the door quick to go get his pants on. Well,
right.
They think he's, so they're pounding on the door, and when he opens it up, they spray him with mace, and they start trying to handcuff him. And the woman jumped on Saito's back, and I'm sorry. They're trying to cuff him, and Saito's fighting him off. And about that time, Patera comes out, and some other policemen come around the corner, and they see one of the cops go flying against the wall, and the girl had jumped on Patera's back, and he fired her. She hit the wall. That's when the police came around. They thought Saito did it. So they all went after Saito. And, you know, it was a bad deal for him.
How many years did they serve for that? I forgot.
You know, I don't know, a couple.
Yeah. Memories of young Leon White, who was later on Vader.
He came to me in Denver, Colorado after a match, sat down across from me, and he says, and he's got a cowboy hat, and he's got his agent there. He wants to be a wrestler. I said, well, what makes you think you want to? Oh, I fight in the bars all day, I knock everybody out. I said, there isn't anybody here that you could beat.
What was it?
I said, including me, and I'm just a little guy. And I said, I'll show you right now. He goes like that. He says, I'd knock the shit out of you. I said, well, okay, if you really want to wrestle, then you need to go through our camp, and Brad Ringens is running it right now. And I said, don't mess with him. I told Brad just kicked the crap out of him. Leon was amazed that, you know, he wasn't as tough as he thought he was. He was a hard guy. And then once he got in and started making a little bit, he got the big head and hard to work with.
I'm going to just mention some names I want you to go through because I got a lot of questions coming up. What about Bad Company? Pat Tanaka and Paul Diamond? Memories of those guys?
Great in the ring.
Okay.
Fantastic in the ring.
Destruction Crew?
Good guys.
Tom Zink?
Flaky.
In what aspect?
He had all the potential in the world, but he just didn't have his head screwed on right.
Scott Norton?
Scott had a lot of potential too. He was another one that was hard to deal with, you know. He was a big, strong guy. He should have done a lot better in wrestling than he did.
DJ Peterson?
DJ, he was a good hand, really good hand. Nice kid too.
Medusa?
She was a great gal.
Jake the Milkman Milliman?
Well, he was a TV guy.
Yeah.
He
got over though.
Yeah.
A little cold fire.
So did Kenny J and George Scrap Iron Gadowski. They were on TV more than we were. You know, they were on every week.
DDP?
DDP, you know, he surprised me. When I was working for Turner, Eric Bischoff told me to make him a star. And I said, here's what I said to him. I said, you've got Steve Austin, you've got Booker T, you have Triple H, you have Kevin Nash, those are your next 4 stars. And they told me I was crazy, and they fired all of them.
That's ridiculous. And
they told me to make Dallas Diamond Page. I thought Diamond looked too old at the time to really get over with the younger generation.
Right.
But he proved everybody wrong. He was a hard worker, dedicated, and busted his ass to get where he got.
Early memories of Paul Heyman?
Paul, I was never a big Paul Heyman fan.
Why is that?
I don't know. There was just something about him that I didn't trust. You know? He look at you, and it reminded me of the guy that we worked with, a guy out of India or out of Saudi Arabia one time, and he left, and my dad said, you know, we knew he was lying to us, and he knew we knew, but he kept lying. And that's what I'd look at when I'd look at Paul Heyman. I would think that.
It's funny. I hear that a lot.
Oh, do you?
Oh, yeah. Ricky Rice, Derek Dukes?
You know, they were okay for that time. They weren't ever going to be big stars, either one of them.
Memories of your feud with probably one of the greatest workers of all time, Curt Hennig, for the AWA title.
We had some great matches. I'll tell you what, the hardest match I've ever had to wrestle, and the Curt had to wrestle, was when him and I wrestled in Minneapolis, and Larry Hennig was on ringside and Vern was in my corner. My God, each one of them is screaming at us, do this, do that, do this, don't sell that, don't sell that, you know, and I'm going. We finally, I said, hey, just forget what they're saying, let's just just go with what we feel.
Did you see the potential in a young Curt Hennig early on?
Oh yeah, I have trained Curt, yeah.
There were several instances where the promotion did the main event finishes where it appeared you had won the title, and then the belt was handed back to Hennig on technicalities. Do you think, looking back, that might have been done too often and burned out the crowd?
I don't know. Wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. You're asking me that. Have you watched the WWE lately?
Of course. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And you know, pretty soon they run out of stuff. You know, watching the WWE now, right now, it's so predictable because every match there's a run-in. I mean, my God.
Yeah.
They'd have to turn back the clock to turn that thing back around.
Retrain
and be a little more conservative.
We'll talk about the current product coming up at the end. That's okay. It's okay. What led to the angle where Jerry Lawler came in and defeated Curt for the AWA title in Memphis?
Oh man, that's bad. That's a bad taste in our mouth. Jarrett wanted to buy us out, and my dad didn't want to sell to him. And he said, well, the NWA would never give Lawler the title. If we work together, and we're going to work in this USA thing, could we put the title on Lawler? So my dad agreed to it, which was probably the worst thing we ever did.
Business-wise, or?
Both, everything. Politically, business-wise especially. He didn't mean anything in our area. He didn't mean anything nationally. He was a big star down in Memphis, but did nothing for us. So when it was time for him to drop it, what had happened was we had this pay-per-view where he wrestled. Yeah. The deal was Vern would pay his guys, Jarrett would pay his guys. If there was any profit, they would split 50-50. We didn't have any profit after they paid the rent and all the publicity that they had to pay for and all that. Vern paid his guys. Jarrett never paid his guys, but told them that Vern was supposed to pay him.
Typical wrestling.
Yeah. So then Lawler never showed up to drop the belt.
How did that hurt the business? I mean, obviously it...
Well, I mean, it hurt,
yeah.
But, you know, not as much as people would think. I mean, if Lawler would have been over as much as he thought he was in our area, then it would have hurt us more, but...
Memories of the night, Lawler, I think, faced Hennig? I'm sorry. Lawler and Curry?
Yeah, it was a good match. I mean, it was a good match. Kerry was Kerry and Jerry was Jerry. You know, they did their thing.
Whose idea was it to put together the pay-per-view? Was it Jarrett's or was it Dad's? Or?
It was, we were going to do it. They'd convinced us to do it. Let's do a big pay-per-view, Super Clash, all these, you know.
Because you guys already did the Wrestle Rock.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it didn't have the impact because we weren't strong enough nationally with the talent that we had. I mean, I guess that's the easiest way to say it.
Yeah.
We brought in some talent that was over, Ronnie Garvin and Von Erich. I mean, everybody thought, oh God, the Von Erichs are known all over well, they really weren't. And Lawler wasn't known anywhere but out of his area. And we weren't known in their areas, you know, so there wasn't really an attraction to bring it all together. We couldn't get everybody established well enough to be doing that.
Speaking of Ronnie Garvin, I believe Super Clash, you won the TV title from Ronnie, and you feuded with him a little bit. You, I think, won the belt back by countout as opposed to Garvin losing since he was heading to the WWF. Why was that?
I don't think we knew he was going to the WWF. I think we thought he was still working for Barnett.
Okay.
You know, and my dad and Barnett were good friends. And
okay. Memories of winning the AWA TV title tournament against Adrian Adonis?
Adrian and I used to have fantastic matches before he got to be 400 pounds, whatever he got to be.
Yeah.
But he was still good in the ring. We still had a good match, and he was one of those great workers that I don't think got the credit he deserved from a lot of people, from a lot of promoters and wrestlers within the business, unless they worked with him. He was phenomenal.
We kind of talked about this earlier on. When the Battle Royal to fill the vacancy was held for the title that Lawler no-showed and never returned, why didn't the promotion book you to win the belt after so many years of coming close, but you never really got it? It was just...
Well, I mean, I think going back on it, you have to look at credibility. Vern was big on credibility.
Did you personally ever feel that, hey,
No.
I could carry this title? I mean, did you have confidence in yourself?
Oh, I knew I could have, but I think with the talent if Dennis Hilgart really wanted me to have it one night in Milwaukee. Vern was in my corner, and Heenan was in the other corner, and the place was sold out. And I think the people really felt it coming that night, and we worked something where it got thrown out. And Dennis was trying to convince my dad, just put it on Greg. Well, Nick he's got these commitments in Japan in 2 weeks. We can't do it. And I said, well, we're back in Minneapolis next week, or Chicago, where we were. I said, just drop it back to him. I mean, Dennis was promoting Chicago. That's where it was. And Dennis said, and Greg, you drop it back. I said, yeah, I don't have any fucking problem with that.
Yeah.
No. He said it would really help. It would give us a big shot in the arm here in Milwaukee. And Dennis always claimed that after that match, the tennis started going down. He said they were ready for it. With Vern in the corner, if you're ever going to do it, that's the time to do it.
Right.
When something with Vern screws it up and I win the title, and next week we're in Chicago. Well, he was afraid it would get to Bubba, and Bubba would then cancel the trip for Nick, and Nick was making some pretty good shing over there.
Larry Zbyszko won the AWA belt. Thoughts on his title run and working feud with Larry?
Larry who?
Larry Zbyszko.
Yeah, Larry who?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Let's see. He's a legend in his own mind. Oh, he was good in the ring. Larry was good in the ring.
Memories of...
Leave it at that.
You don't like Larry?
Oh, I've always got along. He married my sister.
Right.
And some things happened there that, no, I don't really care for him.
I gotcha. We won't get into
Is
Larry.
he here this week?
I don't believe so, is he? I don't think so.
He is here.
He is?
Oh.
Oh, I did not know that.
Oh, good.
He won't see this in time.
Yeah. Yeah, he won't see this, don't worry.
Yeah.
Memories of the wrestling young Yokozuna in the AWA's Coquina Maximus.
Oh, he was really good for a big guy. Real green when he came to us, but we gave him that gimmick, and he really knew how to work it well, and you could see where he was going to make some money.
You knew it.
Yeah.
What made you decide to retire? Because you did
What
the angle
made
with
me?
him, actually. I mean, what?
Too many injuries. I had a herniated disc in my lower back. I actually had a contract before I went to work for Turner to wrestle for him. And it was really a nice contract. It was the same thing that their top guys were getting at the time. And I was working out. What was the guy? Hurd. He was running. Jim Hurd wanted me down there. And I was working out real hard. Was going to do about 6 weeks and then make the move. And I got to where I couldn't bend over and tie my shoe. God damn it. No, chiropractor couldn't. He says, "Better have an MRI." I had herniated my disc, and they said, "You're done. One slam, bam, bump, you could end up in a wheelchair." And I remember we did Jerry Blackwell. I got it with him.
Was it hard giving up performing in the ring?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it was getting harder, though, because, now I'm working with all green guys, all young guys. So when you work your match, you have to bring them along, and you're not getting, they don't know how to get, wrestling, make each other look good. That was the whole goal of it. And they didn't know how to make you look good. You're making them look good the whole time, and all you're doing is getting banged up. They're slamming you. You tell one guy, I said, "Hey, I got a bad back, don't suplex me." Boom, he suplexes me.
So you knew the writing was on the wall.
Yeah.
Another big, powerful guy that worked with the company, he was an announcer for you guys, did a lot of stuff behind the scenes, Eric Bischoff. What are your memories of working with Eric during his days in AWA?
Eric Bischoff. could tell you some stories there. Eric came to us. He was selling ninja suits out of the trunk of his car. And our last, one of our announcers, I forget who it was left us.
I think it was Larry, because we just did an interview with Eric and he was telling us that.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how Eric became the announcer. Then we worked with him and worked with him and worked with him and worked with him. And then when Jim Herd Jim Herd, he was a character. He came up and met with us and wanted to expand. And he wanted to hire me. He didn't want to hire Byrne. And so then he left and he called me up and he said, "Hey, Greg, I want you to do me a favor. I'll give you X amount of dollars to put our TV in your TV slot." I said, "Wait a minute. You're asking me to stab my father in the back?" I said, "Are you out of your frickin' mind?" I hung up on him. And then he had somebody else call me down there, and I said, "Look, and Eric was, you know, I could see the writing on the wall. We just weren't going to make it. And Eric needed a job, and I said, "Here, why don't you take Bischoff down there and use him as an announcer?" That's how he got the job down there.
Did you get along with him behind the scenes?
Eric?
Yeah.
Then I did.
Not anymore?
Not when I worked for him with Turner, no.
What happened between you two, if you don't mind me asking?
Didn't he tell you?
I don't remember. I actually don't.
I'd signed a contract. I didn't sign it. I had a contract with Bill Watts hired me. It was X amount of dollars. And I said, "Bill, I can't come for that. I'm making more than that here." I said, "Well, what I will do," I said, "if I can come down there," he said, "we're going to give Dusty a break. He's been here a long time, and we have maybe you and Mike Graham and somebody else start doing the booking for a little while, and then we'll bring Dusty back in." I said, "Okay, then here's what I want. I want X amount per rating we go up, and I want a point for every, or X amount of dollars for every point it goes up on the pay-per-views. I want to build in some incentives here. If we can't make it work, I don't get paid."
Right.
It's that simple. I said, "That's why I've always worked. Incentives. That's why the wrestlers always worked, and that's the way I want to work." Great. So I went down there, and the first day in there, he had Jim Ross in there, and a couple of, I forget who else was in there at that time. Crockett, one of the Crockett's. And he said, "What's wrong with our program? Why can't we compete with McMahon? I want you to tell everybody. You've told me." I said, "Well, here's what you need to do. Here's the steps you need to follow. And Jim, you've got to tone it down. If you're going national, people up in Minnesota don't like that southern twang and that screaming all the time. They just don't like it. And if you're going to go into the AWA area or you're going to go into New York, I don't think it's going to make it." That's one thing. Cameras, what you have to do to compete. I went through the whole thing, laid it all out for him. And I hadn't signed my contract yet. And Bill said, "Just hang on for another week before you sign it, okay? I want to go over a couple of things with you here." He said, "You made some really good, that was really a strong presentation you made." I said, "Okay." So then at the end of the week, Bill is sitting, we're sitting talking, and he says, "They got this, they want to make somebody an executive producer." And I said, "Well, maybe I should go down there and, you know, talk to Bill Shaw about it." They got Bischoff in there, and they got Tony Schiavone, and they've got David Crockett, and then who was the big heavy guy that used to do his own thing in Atlanta TV?
Joe Pedicino?
Joe Pedicino. They're up for it. He said, "It's not that big of a deal." So we're on the road all week, and we end up in I forget where, somewhere in South Carolina. And Bill was going to meet us there, and we signed the contract. He comes in, and he says, "Well, I just got fired today, and Bischoff's your new boss. He's the executive producer." I went, "Oh, fuck."
Writing was on the wall.
Kidding me. Yeah. So I hadn't signed the contract, and then they had, and Dusty was out. Mike Graham and I were laying out probably 9 TV shows we had to get done. And we're in the room working, and Eric comes walking in, hands his piece here, sign your contract. I said, "Eric, we got all these TVs to get done tonight." I'm going to take it home with me and let my lawyer look at it.
Right.
No, here, sign it. No, he got out. He came back probably 5, 6 times. And I said, has anything changed in this? No, nothing's changed. So we signed the thing. Stupid. I learned a lesson that way. So the first pay-per-view comes up and the ratings come out and they've gone up. And I said, hey, Mike and I get our bonuses here. What do you mean your bonuses? That's in our contract. Well, there's nothing in there. He'd taken all the things we had and put it in his contract. So now we're on the road and he wants me to ride back with him. And I said, Eric, I'm so pissed off at you. He said, what do I need to do to turn this thing around? And I said, you got to get Hogan. That's the only way you can turn it around and compete with McMahon. He said, well, I don't know him. Can you get him? I said, I can contact him and I can get him. But first, I want a contract with you and Bill Shaw. I want a piece of Hogan. I want a piece of his merchandising. I want a piece of the ratings. I want all this like was in my other contract. You get me that in writing and I'll get it to you. So 2 days later he calls me in. I said, you got the deal? He said, I talked to Bill. They're getting it worked up, but Bill's going out of town Friday. Can you get to Hogan? I said, I've already contacted him. He'll sit down and listen, but I want that thing in writing before I'll set up the appointment with you. Somehow he got Hogan's number. The following Monday, I found out they signed him on Friday and never got my deal.
And that was it.
So, well, now I'm steamed. So I got a third thing, and I went and talked to Hogan. I said, Hulk, I got a deal for you. Turner, a good friend of mine, Jack Kelly, he does the Goodwill games for Turner Broadcasting. And he called me in, and I've been talking to him, and they lost their TV in Russia. I said, my father and I were going to train a guy named Alexander Karelin. He is the Greco-Roman champion, 4 gold medals. He's won in 4 different ones. And he wants to turn pro. Then we met him, and we're going to teach him how to work. Here's my idea. We have a pay-per-view. We'll build him up for a year here. A pay-per-view, you and him in Russia. We'll come back with one in the U.S. And we'll do a neutral site, the 3rd one in Japan. I said, it'll kill McMahon. We'll kill him. He told Bischoff. So we do our taping down in Florida. I go home for the weekend. I get a call Sunday night. I'm going to leave Monday for the taping or Friday, whatever it was. And he said, hey, there's no need to come back. I said, what do you mean? You're done.
Who called you?
Bischoff. He said, you went behind my back. I said, well, after 2 times, kicked in the balls, why wouldn't I go behind your back? He said, well, you're done. I said, okay, this was on a weekend. And I said, okay, I'll see you Monday. So I flew back to Atlanta Monday. I went up, I was going to throw him out the window on the 14th floor. And he never showed up. So that's the story how that thing went down.
And you haven't talked to Eric since at all then?
I've talked to him a few times. I think we've brushed paths. I've talked to him a couple times about his production company. I had something for him. But I said, what I want to do, before I present this TV show I've got, I want to come and sit with you and eyeball and talk face to face before we do that.
Right.
But we haven't done that.
Going back before the final days of AWA, which I believe was in '91, May of '91, the AWA did the tag team, because we kind of jumped ahead, the tag team challenge series. Who was responsible for coming up with that idea, and what was the mindset behind it?
Which one was it?
The tag team challenge series. I don't know if you remember.
I don't remember.
Okay. It wasn't that big of a deal, so.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. There's been a lot of talk, why AWA officially shut down. The WWE put out the documentary on the promotion, and Bischoff actually have both said it wasn't the competition of the WWF, but really the legal battles that Vern trying to fight off the eminent domain acquisition of some of the land that he owned by the government that finally killed the company. Well,
that, and he'd end up putting a lot of these wrestlers on contracts, paying them the money that they weren't producing. The biggest thing is what I told you when we took all our spots on ESPN and gave them to WGN. I mean, right then that shut us down.
How did your father take the end of the company, and how did you take it?
Oh, it was tough on both of us. Man, it about killed him. He had that going, plus this eminent domain. He had 58 acres out on Lake Minnetonka, which is a suburb of Minneapolis, and that piece of property is probably worth $200–300 million right now. And they took it from him. They eminent domain. He fought it for 7 years, paid off a couple of different attorneys. They put him in a place that my mom went downhill. I mean, the battle took a toll on both of them. That isn't what put him out of business. That was his, that was his 401k plan, was that land. Selling off a lot every year or two. What put him out was when we pulled the spots from ESPN.
Before the company closed, you guys also settled a workman's comp claim, I guess, against the AWA. What was the cause of that claim?
Who did?
Wasn't there a workman's comp claim against the AWA? Okay.
No, not that I ever remember. No.
All right. After the AWA actually officially closed, how long were you pretty much out of the wrestling business for? Before you got hired by WCW?
No, I got hired by them in, what, 93?
So about 2 years?
Yeah, 2 years. 91's when I
What did you do
them.
during that time off? Just get back to family
Look
life?
for work.
Look for work, okay.
Yeah.
How did you end up getting the call from WCW? Was it
Bill Watts
Bill
called
Watts
me.
called you?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Bill, when he wrestled for my father, I was only about 12 years old, but they used to work out together, lift weights, and he'd get me on the weights. And I really became pretty close to Bill. And Bill, he was having a tough time down in Atlanta. He wasn't getting his point across the way he thought it should go. And he learned a lot from my dad. In fact, when my dad passed away, he sent me a nice letter and maybe a phone call. And he knew the one thing that nobody down there could do was see the long-range product and where it was going down the line. So my first week there, I laid out their whole year of pay-per-views for him. And he said that's nobody could do that. They were so used to the weekly thing. They'd go from week to week to week. Nobody could see that long range where you wanted to go. And that's what my father taught me. So that's what I did the first week, laid out that whole year for him, and
What did you think of the product at the time when you first came into WCW?
Well, they had some, like I said, they had Steve Austin, they had Triple H, they had Kevin Nash, they had Booker T. They had some good talent, but they were all green yet.
Right.
But there was the potential there. You just had to bring them along. And I've said that to a lot of people over the years, The one thing that my father taught me and what he was really good at was bringing young talent around and how to make them, help them evolve into the stars. And that's what very few people know how to do.
What were your main responsibilities working for WCW?
Well, it was booking, writing the TV first with Dusty. Of course, when Dusty was late, they gave him a month break, and then when he came back in, Mike and I were with Dusty, and they brought in Fuller and Bill Dundee, so the five of us. But we had a lot of TV we had to lay out all the time. I was a little. It was a little awkward for me because they all came from weekly territories. Ours was a monthly run. And when you're going nationally, you have to do it more on a monthly run deal. So it was harder for me to get my points across to the guys than it would have been with some other people that were used to that.
Right.
You
worked a little bit with Eric Bischoff around this period of time as well.
Mm-hmm.
Had he changed since his time at AWA at all, as far as personality-wise?
Had he changed? Yeah, he changed. Yeah. I mean, he was a humble, good guy, fun to be around. We used to go hunting together a lot, and but he let it go to his head. And that's what happens to a lot of guys that have. I always relate it this way, okay? When people come into wrestling, guys that were athletes are generally really successful in the sport of wrestling. Guys that weren't are successful, but aren't really successful because they let it go to his head. I mean. Jesse Ventura was a prime example. Guy couldn't hold his hands up. He could talk good. Everybody had to work around him in the ring to make him look good. It was hard for him to make his opponents look good, is how you really keep the thing rolling and you get everybody established. He couldn't do that. But if you talk to him, he was the greatest thing that ever hit wrestling.
Right.
And there was a lot of guys like that.
What did you think personally as the Monday Night Wars were going on and as Bischoff was close to putting out WWE out of business?
Well, let me tell you, and I should have brought this up with before I left Turner Broadcasting, and we had Hogan there and everything. I said, here's your deal, man. You got Flair, you got Hogan. Here's what you do. Talk to Vern, buy the rights from him for the AWA, buy the rights for the NWA, which I think they already had. Start the two leagues again, AWA versus NWA. You've got Hogan, AWA champion, Flair, NWA champion. You've got your WrestleMania built in every year. I said, you're weak right now in the Midwest and the West. Now you've reestablished the AWA. I can get some guys from New York that wrestle for the AWA, and you got Hogan. You do a card, 2 matches, AWA, 2 NWA. Building to your pay-per-views. Eventually you can have crossovers. You can have Flair. He originally started the AWA Jump League. You know, you have...
Do you think it was too far gone at that point in the wrestling audience, or do you think...
No, I mean, he had me in a room with all the TV people, and this is what I laid out to him, and he told me I was nuts, it wouldn't work.
Who was saying that?
Bischoff.
Okay. And
then when they fired me, they started the WCW versus the NWO instead of the AWA and NWA, which would have been stronger for him. The only thing I didn't tell him was how to keep it going. That's the secret. There's only a few people in the sport that know how to keep something going.
Were you surprised that Eric had the ability to build WCW to such a huge success? Or do you think it was people around him?
Well, it was people around him that built it. He took everybody's ideas. I mean, he was smart that way. It was a typical corporate person, you know? They talk to all the underlings, they give them ideas, and then they go and, oh, here's my idea, you know? Take the bows for it.
What was it like dealing with Turner Broadcasting Management?
They were tough. They didn't want wrestling on. It was real tough. You know, Ted loved it. It got him to where he was. It made TBS, wrestling did. But nobody in the corporate wanted to admit that and didn't want it, and they didn't want it on.
What led you to
Have
leave?
I buried myself enough on this tape yet tonight?
No.
Nobody will ever talk to me again. I've never talked to anybody else. I guess it does make a difference.
What led you leaving WCW? Was it the fallout with Eric?
No, Eric fired me.
Okay, that was the fallout. Okay,
yeah.
But Hogan wasn't in yet, right? He was just coming in.
No, I brought Hogan.
Okay.
I was there when Hogan came in, and then when they screwed me on the thing, then I talked to Jack Kelly, and he told me, and I said, well, here's how I know how we can get Turner back in Russia on TV.
Oh, okay.
By signing the Russian.
Okay, yeah.
He's a superstar in Russia. He's won 4 gold medals. They will put Turner back on if we make him a star.
Okay, I thought that the whole thing was over. You bringing Hogan in, and Eric went to Hogan's behind your back.
Well, he did do that. That was the second time. The third time then was when I did this, and that's when he fired me over that. But prior to that, I had laid out the NWA, the AWA, NWA thing, and you know, that would have been the best thing for them to do. They could have captured the market for McMahon right there. They had the 2 guys. They had Flair and they had Hogan. You just don't have them meet. They pushed them right into each other and throw them in a cage match right away, which I was against. I said, you don't need it. Take Flair, take Hogan, get USA Today, put big pictures of them like they do in boxing, match of the year. You don't need a frickin' cage match.
Well, do you think that would have been hurt because WWF already did the Hogan Flair thing?
No.
Okay.
I didn't think so at all. It was still, you got the 2 biggest stars. Here they are. And what is it? I mean, McMahon has told everybody in the world that his wrestling is all a show. It's entertainment. Turner was still on the thing that this is legitimate.
Wrestling, right.
So here it is. Here you got. That's the way you sell the package.
For a time, there was AWA Classics TV. I believe it was only airing locally in Minnesota, hosted by your father and yourself.
Oh yeah.
What was the story behind that?
It was the local station there came to us, and wrestling always. We had in our prime, we had a 24 rating with a 64 share. Only one show nationally beat us. That was 60 Minutes at a 25 rating, 65 share.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was not only in Minneapolis. That was in all our markets. We had numbers like that. You know, so it always made money for them. So they wanted a good Saturday morning show. They had an opening, and one of the local sponsors came to us and said, "Hey, here, this is what we want to do. Put it on." And you know, it made money for the TV station. We didn't make anything off of it though, but it was a good show for them.
Well, you did make money off the sale to WWE. I was going to ask you how that came about between WWE and your family to sell the rights to the library.
We started the AWA Classics. Stan Hubbard's own KSTP station in Minneapolis. Okay, they were the first ones to put the satellite in the air. They sold the satellite to DirecTV for $2 billion. Before they sold it, Stan Jr. came to us and he said, "Why don't we do a pay-per-view? We'll promote it nationally for you in all our markets." So they did. We did a pay-per-view on DirecTV, the first one besides McMahon doing it on there, and it did some really good numbers. So they wanted to keep us on. We did a show once a month for them. We did 32 shows, I think, 30 or 32, and we were getting paid every month from it. McMahon went to DirecTV. This is the story I got from my brother-in-law who worked with DirecTV and Todd Okerlund. McMahon went to them, was trying to negotiate a better deal for them, and they said, "Vince, we don't need you. We've got wrestling." That's what turned him to coming.
How did your family feel about selling the material?
Well, we had partners. We had Todd Okerlund, Bob Graziger, Joe Kupik, my dad and I. And my sisters weren't in on it. And so they felt they got kind of taken by the whole deal. But it was a business deal that we made with them on the pay-per-views. It had nothing to do, you know, business was business.
Right. What did you think of the AWA documentary they produced on you?
You know, I didn't see the whole thing. I've only seen bits and pieces of it.
Just too hard to watch, or you were there, you lived it?
Yeah, you know, and well, when I started watching, some of the things some of the guys said were not accurate.
Right.
But you know, because it was lean more with McMahon's people on there, and they were all leaning it all towards Vince. I mean, they're not going to cost them their jobs. I think that's the reason why I didn't. I mean, it was good, but it could have been a lot better if everybody would have said how they really felt and what really happened. What I'm telling you right now is what really happened and how everything really went down. And there was only 3 of us that knew: McMahon, Vern, and Greg.
And we're here with Greg right now. So.
Yeah.
A couple more questions and we'll wrap this up. We got a page left of questions. What did the AWA think of Dale Gagne saying that?
The crook. Still, you know, told everybody he was related to us.
Yes.
He went even down. I called to get the copyright of the AWA. They said, "Well, no, your relation already got it, Dale Gagne." I said, "What do you mean he got it?" Well, he said he's no relation to us at all. He's a crook. He's a liar, a cheat.
Were you surprised that as soon as WWE sued him in regards to the rights, he never defended himself?
Who? I'm sorry.
Well, I guess when WWE went to sue him in regards to the rights, he never defended himself.
Well, yeah, a lawyer wanted us to sue him too, but you know, he has no money. What are you going to get from him? And all you're going to do is pay the lawyers.
Memories of inducting your father into the WWE Hall of Fame. And did you find it ironic that WWE and Vince McMahon were now honoring him? Was it hard for you?
It was a surprise. It was a gesture, and I've worked for McMahon's, and I like them. They're a little ruthless, and anything they can do to help them, they'll do. So I don't know, because they bought the tapes, if that's why they were doing this, or Vince really, I think he really felt he had to do something for Vern. That's what I want to believe. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, and I probably never will know. But I think so.
How did your father feel about the induction?
Well, he was at the point where he was starting to get, he had the Alzheimer's. He thought it was great. I mean, he's the one that just, you know, really was disgusted with Vince. And it was just a whole turnaround. And Vince wrestled a match that night. My dad went in and told Vince it was fantastic. And you know, I think his memory was the point where he didn't remember the things that had happened, or he just said, you know, It's done. It's over with. Let's move forward. Because he was like that.
Who wrote his speech?
I did the whole speech. I didn't write it. I just...
Off the top of it.
I always, every time I do a speech, I work on it in my head for a couple weeks before. I never write it because when I look at notes, I lose my train of thought.
Right.
And I just talk from the heart. And that's always been, tell it the way it is and talk from the heart and be honest with people.
Memories of spending that weekend with him and your family in Chicago?
It was great. I mean, it really was. It was nice. Like I say, the McMahon family treated us with all respect in the world. For his funeral here, they were very generous. Stephanie called me, sent flowers, pictures, tapes, anything we needed, they gave to us, and it was it really helped at the funeral. Really made it a really, if there is such thing as a good funeral, It's the way Vern would have wanted it.
What led to WWE hiring you to work in developmental after?
Well, I went to McMahon in Chicago, and I said, I'd like to come to work for you. It was that simple. That's what I said. And eventually, why I went to the developmental? Well, first, I was used to being booking.
Right.
And we had our table, and that's what I thought they did there. So he said, well, do you want to be one of the writers? I said, well, yeah, I can do that. Well, I'm not a good writer. I'm just not. But I went in there, and I thought, it's the same thing. We're booking, and there's going to be somebody Vince will make the final decision. I throw out ideas. And got in there, and all of a sudden there's these guys. Geez, who's this guy? Well, he wrote for David Letterman, him for Seinfeld, him for... I said, writers? What? So I was really out of my element there with that. I just didn't believe in writing an interview for somebody and them creating personalities. The hardest thing for me is when Vince did see this one match, he said, why aren't my guys learning? I said, they're not being trained that. Can you do it? I said, yes, I can do it. And that's when I went to Louisville and WWE, and I wrote the show. And their show, actually, I was doing it just like the way we used to do it. Danny Davis, he said, the problem we have here, I got these guys wrestling in these little high schools, and we're only drawing like 15, 20 people. It's not getting them used to, having to really perform in front of people. So we programmed the show. And actually, Danny had sold, I think, 4 or 6 shows to Six Flags. And we programmed it, and I brought Dusty in with Cody, and we had and brought Danny back in a glove match for a final one. And SmackDown was in there on Monday or Tuesday, I think, before us. On the Saturday, we outdrew them.
I was going to say, you guys outdrew them.
Yeah. And I think that was our downfall.
What was it like working with Danny?
Danny's phenomenal. Danny was old school.
Yep.
And the philosophy that I came from. So it was really easy to work with him and Al Snow. They were fantastic. Al and I had the same feel for what needed to be done in the ring. My problem is, they have coaches outside the rings telling people what to do. You can't tell somebody what to do. You have to get in and show them. That's the way I learned, and that's when you grasp it. So I'd get in the ring with these guys, and that's the way I had to do it. But
who were the talents that you thought were the best wrestlers that were there when you were there?
Well, you had CM Punk, who, with his appearance, I wasn't sure that he would really fit in. But he had tremendous work ethic, and he could really do an interview. I was taught to do an interview. There's 3 parts to it, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And if you give somebody the beginning and the end, they can fill in the middle. And that's how we used to work with him. That's what I was in charge of. So when Jesse was doing an interview, I said, Jesse, we're in San Francisco. Tie yourself in with, I can't think of the singer from San Francisco. Oh, God.
I don't know.
I'll think of it. Huey Lewis.
Okay, yeah.
We'd always try to tie them in with something locally when we're doing those, and that was my job, to help them find out what was going on locally so they could tie in. If they're in Denver, something with the Denver Broncos, if they're in the season, or the baseball team. So that's how I was teaching them how to do interviews, and they didn't like that. They wanted me writing them for them. And so we went up. I was called back to the office one day, and I'm with the writers up there, and they're looking for somebody to be a pirate. And I said, a pirate? What the fuck do you need a pirate for? We need a pirate for merchandising. So I forget the kid's name.
Paul Burchill.
Paul, they said, here, take him. I said, he can't be one. I said, he's been in the camp for 2 years. He's finally, it's fucking coming to him. Don't do that to him. They made him a pirate, what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? He's fired. And I said, what do you mean you're firing him? I said, he's been working 2 years. His goal is to be a professional wrestling because he can't be a pirate. You're going to fire him? So I think I pissed off a few people, but, you know,
right.
The poor kid, I mean, that's just not fair.
What are your thoughts on the way OVW was handled by WWE?
Way it was handled?
I mean, did they treat the company the way you think they should have?
Well, I don't know because I didn't know, you know, what was going on.
Right.
Laryngitis, he was overseeing it.
Did you get along with Bill DeMott at all, or?
Bill DeMott?
Yeah.
Well, here's the problem I had. Bill and I thought we did. My first day down in Atlanta, I get in the ring with the guys. And I spent 3 hours with them. But the first guy, I tie up with him, and I said, who the fuck taught you to tie up like this? Bill did. Right. So, and Jody and Bill had their ways. They wanted to train the guys, and I had mine. Not that theirs wasn't the right way, and mine was the right way. We had to kind of mesh together. But I got to go back and how I was trained. And when Vern produced 144 wrestlers, and 140 of them all made main event money, he must have been training them right. And I told Stephanie, I said, Stephanie, the only problem I see what you have training these guys, you don't have anybody that was ever successful in the main event.
Right.
Training guys to be in the main event. How can somebody that's not been in the main event train people to be in the main event? I said, oh, you make a good point.
It's true.
And that's, so I started training the way I did, and then when my contract was to be renewed, first I was told, well, I can replace you with somebody younger and not pay him as much. I said, you're telling me I'm too old? No, 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 no. But you're teaching him to drop kick the wrong way.
I was going to ask you, that was a story that I heard too.
Yeah. I said, what? I made my living drop kicking. Well, Jody Hamilton, he wanted the guys all to go off their right foot. When you're taught how to drop kick, if you're right-handed, you lead with your left foot. It's just natural. You're going to kick with your right. Everything's going to be right-handed. So you have to go up with your right and push off the left. It makes it much easier. Most of these guys are right-handed. None of them could do it. They were all flopping around, and they couldn't learn a drop kick. It's not that hard. So I turned around. I said, "No, you're right-handed, aren't you?" "Yeah." "Then go off this." Boy, now they start drop kicking. So Jody told Vince, I'm teaching them the wrong way to drop kick. And when Stephanie said that, I said, that fat ass never trained, never drop kicked anybody. How the fuck would he know what is right and what's wrong? You have to make it what's comfortable for the guy.
Right.
If he can't do it the other way, then you try it the other side. It's that simple.
When they told you they were letting you go, what was your reaction?
Well, she said that, and I came back with that, and then she made another comment that I was hitting on some of the girls down there, and I said, come on, Steph. I mean, I'm not going to be hitting on the girls down there, for crying out loud. Obviously, you don't want to pay me. You don't want me back. I don't have a problem with that. I'm tired of being on the road. So I said, you know, you go your way and I'll go mine, and there's no hard feelings. And I don't have any hard feelings for them.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to bring up the girl thing because I didn't know how personal you wanted to get, but that's what we were told too. That like one day you walked into one of the locker room naked or something like that. And
no, I didn't. I walked in and one of the girls had her. I was doing the TV and they weren't ready, and I'm knocking on the door and nobody's opening it. And I said, "Hey, come on, we got to go out there. We got to go over this thing." And I walked in and one of the girls had just taken her top off. Gotcha. I mean, I wasn't going in to get a look.
Right.
I was just trying to get them off their asses and get them going. They're all over their, they're all putting their makeup on and stuff.
What are your thoughts on the following guys that you got a little bit chance to work with? Triple H, Hunter?
Fantastic. Unbelievable. I worked with him in Atlanta, and I told them that he was going to be the next big star, and they told me I was crazy. No, he has a good feel for old school and the new school, which very few guys did.
John Laurinaitis?
John? What did? I don't have any hard feelings with John. He was a good guy.
Stephanie?
Stephanie, no hard feeling. I mean, she, you know, Stephanie, she's really devoted to the business. She loves it. She's really driven. She's a lot like her father, more so than Shane was. When I talked to her last week, I said, "Are you spending some time with your family?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, good." I said, "It's really important that you do, because when I was there, you were always in that office." We had a little incident on the plane one night on their private jet when we were going to one of the towns, and Stephanie's in her seat, and Triple H, and I'm behind him, and Kevin Dunn and Vince. And Kevin Dunn says to me, "You know, Vince never had any intention of putting anybody out of business." I said, "What the fuck are you kidding?" "Well, no, he didn't." So we went into a few things then, and then Stephanie said, "My dad made Hulk Hogan." And I said, "Stephanie, you weren't even around to know what was going on at that time." And she got a little pissed at me. But, you know, I can't hold it back. I got to say what I'm thinking and what I feel.
Is it true you had an idea for a wrestling project that was similar to what later became MMA?
Yes.
I guess, why did your version never really get off the ground?
No, my dad did, 1995.
Yeah.
We took it to the USA Wrestling, amateur wrestling. My father's a big sponsor of that,
right,
an amateur wrestling, and we took it out to them. His idea was to take the martial arts and go against the amateur wrestlers. And he said, real fight, you know. And the Olympic Committee at the time and the USA Wrestling thought it would be too violent, and they wouldn't do it. The wrestlers themselves, I mean, Randy Couture was there, and Chuck Liddell.
Oh, yeah.
And those guys, they were all for it. I mean, the wrestlers wanted it because they wanted a shot at those, you know, karate guys would tear them apart. But we couldn't come up with the rules that would allow it not to be so violent. And the Olympic Committee and USA Wrestling just wouldn't go for it. So they shot it down.
Now look at UFC.
Yeah, look at it. It's huge.
Thoughts on TNA? You follow the product?
I can't. I've watched it very seldom. I'll try to watch. I can't get through it.
Neither can anybody else, so don't worry.
It's too bad. I mean, see, it's putting people in place, running wrestling, that look at it from the outside as just a big show. It is a show, but there has to be some credibility and some
logical writing.
Logical, yeah. And you don't need all this bullshit all the time.
Too much gaga.
We used to have two guys who go against each other for 20, 25 minutes, and the place would be standing, and it would sell out the next time to see the return match.
Because the guys know how to tell a story back then.
Right.
Yeah.
And they don't now, and a lot of it has to do with the general public. TV is done, they do all their researches all the time, newscasts. 8 seconds is about the amount of time people can concentrate on anything.
Because there's so much. Yeah.
Right. So Vince is probably afraid to go back to slowing down the matches because he's afraid they're going to click the channel. And I can understand that. But in your pay-per-views, you don't have to do that. Get back to telling a story. People, when you watch the WWE, you see very, very seldom do you see a lot of emotion coming out of the crowd about an individual that's in the ring. The only guy I've seen get it was, yes, Brian. Because they feel sorry for him. Because he sells. Now he's getting away from that a little bit. And you know, you got to stay with it. The people will buy it. You got to give them something to get their emotions into. You know, now the guy punches the guy and the guy punches him and they boom, 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 and there's no story. You're just watching this. It's a ping pong match.
Yeah. It's funny because Steve Austin was just talking about the art of selling and how it's pretty much lost.
It is.
Yeah.
It's gone.
How did you end up in the role in the first Highlander film?
They wanted to shoot some wrestling footage, and they came to, we had the match at the Meadowlands, and they came to Vern. They said, we need a real exciting, something where there was a lot of movement And he said, well, the best match you're going to probably get is that 6-man tag team match with the Freebirds and these 3 guys.
I didn't even ask you about Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, and Buddy Roberts. What are your memories of those guys?
Well, we didn't get to work with them that much. My memories of them?
Right.
Shit. No shows. You know, 3 were supposed to show up, 2 would show up. 2 would show up, or 1 would show up, and the other 2 wouldn't. You know, they had some problems at that time, you know, outside of the ring. It was too bad because they were really a talented group. Another
guy I didn't get to ask you about was Colonel De Beers. What are your memories of Colonel De Beers? And do you think his gimmick went a little bit too far when he first came in with the races?
I don't think so, because he got a lot of heat, and I mean he was a great talker, and he could back it up in the ring. You know, I mean your interview has to
sell tickets.
Well, sell tickets, but it's also got to unite with the way you work in the ring.
Right.
And he did.
Thoughts on the recent story that happened with Buck Zumhofe and his arrest and incarceration? Were you surprised?
Was I surprised? In a way. There's a lot to that story, you know, and it's both sides. If what came out really happened, he deserves to be there.
So were you shocked when you heard the news?
No, I'd done some things for Buck for a long time, and way back, we did one in Mankato, Minnesota, a little appearance. Jim and I went down there, and when we came out, Jim said to me, geez, I hope, she was like 15 or 16, I hope Buck isn't doing something with his daughter. I said, what makes you think that? And just watching them and some of the things she said tonight, and I never, it went by me. Then a couple other times, the last time before that happened, I had made an appearance for him, and we had to drive back. We stayed at his house because we were going to another appearance. And she rode with me, and I could tell something was really bugging her.
Huh.
And she never did tell me until one night she called me on the phone and said, I can't stand it anymore.
This is his daughter?
This is his daughter.
Right.
And I said, well, if that's what really happened, you know, you got to get away from him, dear.
Did you ever want to report it to the authorities, or you just want to stay out of it?
I didn't. It was hearsay.
Right.
I mean, if I go to the, what are they going to say? Did you see it? Oh, no, right. I didn't see it. Well, then, you know. So I couldn't. I told her, though, to get away from him. I did. I said, hey, if that's what's happened to you, then you need to get away from him as quick as you possibly can.
Going back to your father, when he started getting ill and prior to his passing, how do you want wrestling fans to remember your father, Vern Gagne?
You know, I've thought about that a lot lately, and there's so many things. He meant so much, so many different people. You know, whether the people were 80 or the people were 10, he was one of the few guys that captured that everything in between. And just knowing him as a good guy, he always, the one thing he did, and hopefully I've learned it from him to some extent, he always took time for his fans. And he said that's the most important thing. He said he learned it from Jack Dempsey. And he would be the last one out of the arena. He would sign everybody's autograph. And he would not know you. And if you said hi to him, he'd have a conversation with you for 20 or 30 minutes. And when you got done, you'd think you were the greatest guy in the world.
Right.
And he did that to everyone. My brother-in-law traveled to Europe with him. And he said it was unbelievable. We'd be in frickin' Paris, and somebody had recognized him on the street, and he had talked 20 minutes to him. And before we were done, he would have a gathering of people there, and it was like they were all his friends.
Huh.
He said, we walked into a house down in Ige, France. It said Gagne on it. He knocked on the door, introduced himself. It was a doctor. He had Vern come in. We ended up having dinner with them and found out they were related.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, whether we were in Germany, whether we were in France, whether we were in Italy, wherever we went, somebody knew him, and the conversation would start, and people would just gather around him.
Hmm. What was the official diagnosis? Did he have dementia or Alzheimer's?
Well, Alzheimer's.
Okay.
I mean, dementia is a start of Alzheimer's.
Okay.
Okay. The way I understand it from doctors is ALS, MS, dementia, they're all in the one category. They're all a form of dementia and Alzheimer's. They're a form of dementia, those three.
What advice would you give to families dealing with relatives that might have it?
It's the hardest thing in the world. I don't know what kind of advice you can give. What the doctors told us when you're talking to your father, try to find out the generation where his mind is and talk about things in that generation. A couple weeks before the last year and a half, he had his final rites twice. We went to the house, thought it was all over. Next day, my sister would call me, he's back. And about 2 weeks before he went into his last little 5 day of nothing, one of the hospice ladies came in, sat down, and he couldn't form words. He couldn't talk, but he always smiling, and sometimes he could read things on TV. She sat down and they started singing songs. They sang for 4 hours and he never missed a word. And when she left, my dad turned to my sister and he said, "Wasn't she a nice lady?" That clear. And then about 3 days after that, he went down and he went kind of into just sleeping, and maybe it was a coma for about 5 days. Didn't eat. Every time they would go about 5 days, they'd call and say he's shutting down, come on over. We'd come over the next day and he'd lift the shoulder off the mat.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's your fondest memory of Vern? Your dad?
I got so many with him, you know. Hunting, fishing, just being there for you, you know, talking to him, you know, him coaching me, teaching me how to work. I mean, there isn't a day that's gone by since he's passed that I haven't thought about him.
Is there anything you miss about the business today?
Yeah. I'd like to be a part of it, but I think it's passed me by. I mean, it really has. I couldn't. If guys have to be trained the way they're trained now, and there's no story to the match, that's hard for me to fathom.
Right.
And taking somebody and saying you're going to be a pirate, you're going to be a clown. You know, we learned be yourself, because everybody has something inside who they want to be or how they want to project themselves, and until you let that come out, you're never successful. Mad Dog Vachon, it took him 10 years. He was going to quit wrestling. He was good looking. He was in the 48 Olympics with my dad. He was with Canada. Blonde hair, I saw a picture, good looking guy. Got his teeth knocked out, got hit in the throat, couldn't talk. He's not making it. He's in Portland, Oregon. He's lost his hair, got the beard. And he was so frustrated, he got in the ring, his kid came in, he fired him over the top rope, knocked the crap out of him, hit a couple fans in the front row. The time key or the ring announcer, the police came in, was throwing them around, and when he got back in the locker room, Don Owens said, "You're nothing but a mad dog." So he got his nickname, and from that time on, that's the way he wrestled, and that's how he made it. Until then, he was ready to quit, but he finally found who he really was.
What do you do today for the fans that might want to know?
What do? I work for Land Rover, Jaguar, Minneapolis, peddle those, and that's about it.
Any favorite road stories or ribs you want to share?
God, I got all kinds of them.
What's some of the best?
I'll tell you one. They take a while to. Do we have time? We've only gone a couple hours. Do you have time?
We're going to wrap it up. So I mean,
you want a Mad Dog story? You want a Jerry Blackwell story? Bobby Heenan?
You think it's best. Bobby Heenan's are always good.
Okay, Bobby Heenan. Like I told you, they're going. He's taking Nick and Ray to Japan, and they're in business class. Okay, they're not in first class; they're in business class. So they do the old thing where Bobby gets wheeled up in the wheelchair to the front door, and then he gets up, and they call whoever needs help. So he's the first one, right? So Nick and Ray would get him up there, and then as he's getting on, the flight attendants and the pilots are there. And Bobby would turn around, well, thanks. He'd turn around to Nick and Ray, thanks. And he'd trip himself and do a flip and land in the aisle. And there'd be, oh, my back, my back, my back. And they'd pick him up. What do you need? Oh, get me in a big seat, big seat. And they'd put him up first class. And then he would get Ray Stevens up there with him, because they would drink all the time and Nick wouldn't, so Nick would end up in business.
Oh, that's great.
So then Bobby would be sitting there, and he tells the flight attendant, he says, thank you very much for getting us up. And now they're a little gassed. And he says, but do me a favor, my boy's here. And Nick is back there, by the way. He says, be sure he gets breakfast and bring him one of the first class ones if you would. But we have to eat because they got a big match when we get to Japan. Oh, okay. And if I happen to be sleeping, just wake me up. So Bobby would put the tray down and he'd put the newspaper over and he'd be sleeping, and the flight attendant would come, or he'd put the tray down with the paper over his lap. And she'd come and she'd put the tray up and she'd pull the paper off, and he'd have a zipper out and he'd have his little joint hanging out there, right? And you'd hear this scream, you know, "Ow! Oh!" And he'd go, "Oh, what? Oh my! Oh Jesus! How did that happen?" You know. he would zip it up. So now they're still on their trip. So he would come. He'd apologize. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. Can you do me a favor though?" He says, and "I've got a good Japanese friend of mine in the back, and it's his birthday. It's Mr. Okichimpo. Would you wish him a happy birthday?" Well, in Japanese, Okichimpo means big cock.
Right.
So the flight attendant, "Oh, Mr. Bobby Heenan is here, and he would like to wish Mr. Okichimpo a happy birthday." And all these Japanese women, everybody's laughing back there. And so then they get to Japan, and he's getting off, and he's thanking everybody. And first class, he wants to be the first one off. "Oh, thank you very much. Oh, the best trip we've ever had. I apologize for the zipper and all that." Turn around, thank the pilots, trip himself, flip, and lay there. "Oh, my back, my back." And they'd have to bring the wheelchair down to get him out again. And he'd hold up the whole frickin' plane.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That was one of that's the Heenan stories, but he was always had crap going like
Right.
that. I've been trying to do a reality TV show just telling those old stories.
Oh, my God.
That's what I'm working on right now, and that's what those calls have been about.
That'd be great. Is there anything in closing you want to say to your fans out there that you might not have had a chance?
No, I tell you what, I just hope that anybody out there that ever watched me wrestle, the one thing that my partner and I always, our goal was to make sure our fans got their money's worth. And I hope they did. And I love the support they gave us over the years. And anytime they need anything from me, give me a call or stop me and we'll talk about wrestling.
Well, I want to thank you for being here today with us. It was a great interview, and I appreciate your time. And it was everything.
Well, I don't know if it was a great interview, but it was a long interview.
It was great.
You'll edit it up, and I'll look like an ass when I'm done.
No,
Rob, if you do that.
So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.